The story opens on a freezing winter night, where a busy street lies buried under soft layers of snow, and crowds move through the cold beneath the glow of the city lights. Among all those people, one happy family walks together through the crowd, and their little daughter beams with excitement as she says this has been the best day ever. But their cheerful steps suddenly come to a halt when a tall, mysterious man appears right in front of them, standing in their path like a wall. The little girl tilts her head back and stares up at him with wide, amazed eyes, unable to hide her surprise as she blurts out just how huge he is. Our protagonist, meanwhile, quietly grumbles to himself, annoyed that no matter where he goes, he always seems to be the one forced to dodge around other people. Then, as he looks around at the laughing couples, families, and groups filling the street, it slowly sinks in that he is the only one walking through all of this completely alone. Carrying that bitter feeling with him, the young man keeps moving forward by himself, heading silently toward the entrance of the subway. Just before stepping down, he pauses for a moment, his eyes shifting ahead as something in the distance catches his attention. His gaze sharpens, and his eyes narrow slightly when he notices a lonely figure sitting directly on the cold ground. At that moment, he realizes that maybe he is not the only person on this snowy street who has no one beside him tonight. There, sitting in the snow, is a man dressed like Santa Claus, holding out a sign as he asks passing strangers for help and invites them to make a wish. Seeing him makes the protagonist remember what day it is. Today is Christmas Eve, the very same day his parents died. That painful memory presses down on his chest, and after a quiet pause, he reaches for his wallet, deciding to give the old man a little money. He steps closer to the Santa-looking beggar and offers him the cash, along with a small snack he had been carrying with him. Without making a big scene, the young man gently places both the food and the money down on top of the beggar's sign. But the moment he does, the white-bearded man suddenly grabs his wrist with shocking strength, holding on tightly while thanking him for his kindness. The old man then insists that he has to repay him somehow, and with a serious look, he asks the protagonist to tell him one wish. The young man is completely confused, thinking this strange old guy must have lost his mind. He tells him to let go, but no matter how hard he pulls, the costumed man's grip is far too strong to break. Then the man dressed as Santa reveals that he came here to grant the wish of a truly good person, and in the next instant, he holds the protagonist so firmly that he can barely move at all. Santa Claus desperately pleads for him to say his wish, explaining that only after granting it will he finally be able to return to his village. Growing exhausted by this bizarre situation, the protagonist asks if the old man will finally release him once he says what he wants. Right then, something painful rises from deep inside him, and the young man begins to speak, slowly reaching toward the wish he has buried in his heart. At first, he says he wants to win the lottery, trying to brush the whole thing off, but the old man immediately tells him that this is not his true wish. The young man falls silent and thinks carefully about what he really wants from life. More than money, more than anything else. What he truly longs for is a family that will never leave him behind and will always stay by his side. Then, with a faint smile, he finally admits his real wish. He wants a sweet wife and an adorable little daughter. The bearded man seems to feel the sincerity in those words, and he understands at once that this young man has lived through a deeply lonely life. Because of that, the old man feels as though fate has guided him here, believing he is lucky to have found someone like him, a conjured spirit. His eyes suddenly glow red, and with a solemn voice, he promises to find the young man a pure-hearted wife and a daughter who will respect him. The protagonist freezes in shock as Santa Claus earnestly wishes him a life filled with happiness, warmth, and joy. The instant he finally manages to pull himself free, he bolts away from the old man, shouting that this so-called kind Santa is completely insane. Behind him, the man calls out that he will use every bit of power he has, while claiming that all the other Santas are cheering him on. The scene then shifts, and the protagonist is riding on a train, trying to convince himself that the strange encounter must have been nothing more than a hallucination. Even so, the memory keeps bothering him, and he cannot help wondering why he actually told that stranger his wish in the first place. As his eyes drift toward a family poster inside the train, he quietly admits the truth to himself. He said it because, deep down, he really does want to be happy too. He closes his eyes in the quiet train car, wishing from the bottom of his heart that he could have the same simple happiness everyone else seems to have. But right after that, an unfamiliar smell reaches him, and a sharp, unnatural cold begins crawling across his skin. The young man wakes with a groan, only to find himself shirtless and lying in a place he has never seen before. Startled awake, he snaps his eyes open, and panic immediately surges through him as he takes in the strange surroundings. His vision is still hazy, but through the blur, he can tell that he is inside some kind of wagon, and it is moving. Then the truth hits him even harder. He is locked inside a cage, and he has no idea where in the world he has ended up. As he looks around, he spots other people nearby, all chained and helpless, making him wonder in disbelief if he has somehow traveled back to the Middle Ages. Suddenly, footsteps sound from outside the cell, and the young man immediately turns his attention toward the noise. Two guards are walking nearby while speaking in a language he has never heard before, and he cannot understand even a single word they say. Between the rough, medieval-looking setting and the completely unfamiliar language, the young man is left more confused than ever about what has happened to him. In the end, whether this is a dream or reality, he reaches one terrifying conclusion. He has somehow been thrown into another world. Then he notices an unconscious prisoner nearby, and while staring at the motionless man, he reminds himself that those who are still alive have to keep moving. He moves closer to the unconscious man, quietly apologizing under his breath, then makes the desperate decision to take the man's clothes so he can cover himself. After putting on the garments taken from the other prisoner, the protagonist finally has something to shield his bare body from the freezing air. Just then, Santa Claus's voice echoes inside his mind, repeating that he will grant the young man's wish with all the power he possesses. The young man can only wonder bitterly if this nightmare is really the happiness he was promised, while silently hoping he will wake up from it soon. And so several more days and nights dragged by, with Joe I still locked inside that wagon as it rattled toward some unknown destination. During that time, he gradually realized the terrible truth. Every person trapped in that cage, himself included, had been taken as a captive. As the journey continued, he also began to understand why the soldiers were hauling them from place to place. From what he could piece together, all of them were being transported like goods meant to be traded away as workers. When the wagon finally arrived at a village, a man who looked like the one in charge stepped forward, scanning the prisoners as if he had come to choose the strongest and most useful ones. Accepting that he had been reduced to this kind of situation wounded his pride deeply, but at the same time it gave him the smallest bit of hope. After all, being chosen might be his only chance to get out of that wagon. Since his body was still in good condition, he thought there was a real chance someone would pick him. For the first time since waking up in this strange world, Joe I felt a faint spark of hope flicker inside him. But that fragile hope slowly faded away because even after the wagon passed through village after village, not a single person chose him. So the wagon kept rolling endlessly through faraway forests and rough mountain roads, while Joe I remained trapped inside the wooden cage, sinking deeper into helplessness with every passing mile. Collapsed on the floor of the wagon, the young man stared blankly ahead and wondered whether there was any point in surviving if life here only meant suffering more and more. At that lowest moment, a memory of his mother rose in his mind, her voice telling him that no matter what happened, he had to work hard and live well. He remembered how his mother used to look at him gently and ask if he understood the important words she was trying to leave with him. Joe I then questioned himself in silence, wondering whether he really had the strength to endure this miserable situation any longer. And, as if to make the pain even worse, the memory of Santa Claus promising him happiness returned to his mind, echoing like a cruel joke. Overwhelmed by anger and frustration, he grabbed a fork in his hand, cursing both this cruel world and the world he had originally come from. In that moment of despair, Joe I clenched the object with all the strength he had left, his hand trembling as his emotions nearly swallowed him whole. To him, happiness no longer sounded like a warm family or a peaceful life. Right then, it simply meant escaping this unbearable pain once and for all. But at the very last second, he stopped himself, because somewhere deep down he knew he did not want his life to end in a place like this. He remembered the wish he had spoken from the bottom of his heart, that simple dream of being happy, of having a family who would stay beside him. Slowly, Joe I calmed down, standing there with the fork still in his hand, lost and unsure of what he was supposed to do next. Then, all of a sudden, a breathtakingly beautiful woman appeared outside the cage and quietly offered him a piece of bread. With a soft and gentle smile, she pushed the food carefully through the bars, giving it to the starving prisoner without saying anything harsh. Right after that, a very cute little girl peeked out from behind the woman, hiding shyly as she looked toward him. Joe I was so stunned by the sudden appearance of the woman and child that the fork slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the floor of the wagon. The scene then shifts to a small, humble wooden house standing quietly in the middle of a lonely clearing. Inside that modest home, the same woman and the little girl sit together at a simple table, sharing a quiet meal. The little blonde girl lifts her bowl with both hands and drinks her soup straight from it, eating as though she is truly hungry. Seeing this, the woman gently offers the child her own portion as well, telling her in a warm voice that she should eat more. The girl pauses and looks down at the two bowls on the table, her small eyes moving between them as she realizes what the woman is doing. The woman explains softly that she is already full, so the little girl should take her meal and fill her stomach properly. But the child answers with innocent honesty, saying that if the woman is hungry, then she is hungry too. With that, the little girl pushes the bowl back toward the older woman, refusing to eat alone while the woman goes without food. The woman smiles at the child's kindness, her expression softening, and finally agrees that they should eat together. Suddenly, loud knocks pound against the door, startling both of them, and the voice outside announces that the village chief has arrived. The woman quickly pulls the little girl into her arms, holding her close while warning her not to open the door and only listen quietly. From outside, the man announces that a decision has already been made. One of the prisoners is going to become her husband. The woman freezes in shock at those words. He then orders her to prepare herself, because she will have to return to the mountain together with this new husband. The woman falls into despair, completely unsure of what she can do, because the one thing she cannot bear is going through that nightmare again. Even though she knows she cannot simply run away from the village chief's decision, she clutches the little girl tightly in her arms. She thinks about how she has only known this child for a short time, yet even so, she cannot bring herself to abandon her. Tears begin to fall as the woman imagines leaving the little girl alone in this place. Feeling the woman's fear, the child's eyes fill with tears too, and she starts to cry. The little girl can no longer hold it in, and her quiet sobs break into a loud, desperate cry. Her crying echoes through the dark wooden house, making the silence feel even heavier and the air even more suffocating. Afterward, the woman is left alone in fear, trembling as she wonders what will happen to her from this point on. She curls up on the floor, wrapping her arms around herself, thinking over and over that she does not want to suffer through that horrible experience again. As fear closes in around her, painful memories from her past begin rising in her mind, bringing back everything that led her to this place. She thinks about the sleeping little girl and realizes that the child's situation is painfully similar to her own. The 5-year-old girl did not even have a name, and she was the daughter of the man who had already passed away. Then the woman remembers her own past, when her father traded her away for nothing more than a single rabbit pelt. On the very first day she arrived at her new cabin, the man who was supposed to be her husband treated her with cruelty instead of care. He hurt her before she had even been given the chance to unpack her bags, turning her new life into a nightmare from the very beginning. At that very moment, the truth finally sank in. Her suffering had not ended at all. If anything, the miserable life waiting for her had only just opened its doors. Collapsed on the wooden floor, the woman could barely move. Through her pain and blurred vision, she saw the little girl taking slow, careful steps toward her. In the middle of that horrifying nightmare, when everything around her felt cruel and hopeless, the only person who reached out to her was that angel-like child. The little girl came closer, then gently lowered herself beside the injured woman, trying in her own small way to comfort the person lying helplessly on the floor. Her tiny hand touched the woman with such softness that it said more than words ever could, carrying nothing but worry, warmth, and innocent affection. From that day forward, the man who had gone into the mountains never stepped through the cabin door again. He simply vanished and never returned home. The villagers later said he had been taken by wolves somewhere in the hunting grounds, and that there was no chance he would ever come back alive. When the woman heard that he was gone for good, a wave of relief passed through her first, but right behind it came a deep, chilling fear she could not ignore. She understood her situation far too clearly. In such a harsh and dangerous place, she was now a widow without anyone standing in front of her for protection. A woman without a husband was no different from a sheep wandering outside the fence, exposed in the open and waiting for someone stronger to target her. And so, not long after, the woman and the little girl stepped out from the cabin together, their hands tightly joined as they walked toward the village. But after taking only a short distance down the path, the little girl suddenly stopped in place and lifted her arm, pointing towards something far ahead. Her eyes instantly grew wide with surprise. The moment she spotted a wagon in the distance, she cried out excitedly, unable to hold back her discovery. The woman followed the child's gaze, and only then did she see it as well. A wagon standing there with a prisoner trapped inside a cage. As they moved closer, the young man locked inside the cage seemed to sense someone approaching, and he slowly raised his head from the shadows. The woman's expression changed the instant she saw his face. She finally realized that this was the very same prisoner she had helped before. At almost the same time, the young man's eyes widened sharply, because he recognized the woman and the child standing in front of him. In the next breath, memories of cruelty, helplessness, and despair crashed into his mind all at once, dragging him back to that painful moment. The woman, too, could not help remembering the shouting, the violence, and all the mistreatment she had endured under her husband's anger. She remembered how she had thrown herself between that cruel man and the little girl, using her own body to shield the child from his fury. Reflected in the prisoner's eyes was the woman's frozen face, filled with confusion, shock, and a kind of fear she could not immediately hide. Still holding the bread in her hands, she stood there motionless, caught between wanting to help and not knowing what she was supposed to do next. Just then, the village chief appeared nearby and called out to her, asking whether she had been hanging around that place. His tone quickly turned firm as he warned her that the soldiers would be arriving soon, then told her she should hurry back to the village. The woman forced a small smile onto her face, trying not to look too shaken, and gently told the little one that it was time for them to leave. But the little girl did not move right away. Her worried eyes stayed fixed on the man in the cage, as if she could not simply walk away from him. Inside the cage, the prisoner lowered his gaze to the bread now in his hand, staring at it with an empty, hollow expression. Then, pulled along by the hunger gnawing inside him, he finally began to eat the food the woman had given him, bite by desperate bite. Without warning, 2 guards stepped forward, yanked open the cage door, and shouted harshly for the young man to get out at once. Before he could properly respond, they grabbed him roughly and hurled him out of the wagon, sending his body crashing straight onto the dirt. Lying there after the fall, he caught sight of the piece of bread that had slipped from his grasp and rolled away across the ground. A short while later, the 3 prisoners were forced onto their knees, lined up in the dirt while the village chief coldly ordered them to begin. Without giving any warning at all, the guards struck down the other 2 men with their sharp tools. After they fell, one guard casually wiped his bloodied blade clean against a scroll. Then the guards revealed several glowing scrolls, and the young man stared at them in disbelief, wondering what kind of strange magic he was looking at. Watching everything unfold before him, the young man felt his heart sink. He could only question what kind of insane world he had been thrown into. At that moment, one of the soldiers stepped closer to the village chief and quietly whispered that he could smell manna nearby. The village chief immediately turned his head and fixed his gaze on the kneeling prisoner, who remained on the ground without understanding what was happening. The young man slowly lifted his face, his expression lost and confused, unable to grasp why everyone's attention had suddenly shifted toward him. The moment soon shifts back to the woman's cabin, where the quiet inside is broken by the arrival of an older woman coming to visit her. The older woman hands over a bundle of supplies and tells her to take them properly once she returns to the cabin. She then reminds her that the man does not understand their language, and also warns that the young woman will have to repay everything one day. Speaking honestly, the young woman admits that no one in the village ever truly liked her late husband. They only tolerated him because he was useful as a hunter. Even so, she believes this new man might be different, especially since the soldiers had said he was only a commoner. The older woman studies the matter and comments that although he may look rough on the outside, his hands and feet are strangely soft, almost like those of a noble. With a faint smile, the older woman adds that he has never hurt anyone, and if he turns out to be good at hunting, then their lives could become much more comfortable. But the young woman gently answers that comfort is not what she is asking for. She holds the older woman's hands with sincere gratitude in her eyes. Tears begin to gather as she quietly says that all she truly hopes for is that this new husband will not be a violent or aggressive man. What she wants is painfully simple. Someone who will leave both her and the little girl in peace, without bringing more fear into their lives. Just then, a sudden knock at the door cuts through the room, startling both women as a voice from outside shouts for them to open up. The young woman's body tenses with fear, and she immediately pulls the little one closer into her arms, even as the child continues sleeping peacefully in her lap. She cautiously leaned closer to the wall and peered through a narrow crack, and through that tiny opening she saw the protagonist being brought toward the cabin by the village chief. A moment later, the older man stepped into the house, as if everything had already been decided, then loudly announced that he had brought her new husband. The woman froze in shock and repeated the words in disbelief, asking about this so-called new husband, but the chief simply ordered her to welcome him properly. Then the protagonist was pushed into the house, looking around in complete confusion as he asked where they were taking him, unable to understand a single thing. The woman immediately grew frightened and questioned why they had dragged a sick man all the way to her home in such a rough state. Her eyes slowly moved up to the young man standing in front of her, and a trembling thought crossed her mind. Was this really going to be her new husband? When she noticed just how tall he was, the young woman stiffened in surprise. thinking she had never seen anyone so huge in her entire life. The man, however, only grew more confused when he saw the fear on her face, because he had no idea what he had done to make her react like that. After staring at her for another moment, he finally recognized her. She was the same woman who had quietly given him that piece of bread earlier. But when he saw her shoulders trembling and her expression shrinking away from him, he could not help wondering why she was so terrified of him. Before he could figure it out, the village chief grabbed him firmly by the arm and barked at him, as if asking why he was just standing there. The older man then pulled him forward with force, dragging him closer to where the woman and the little girl were huddled together. Pointing directly at the young man, the chief made the introduction official, presenting him to the woman as the husband who would now belong to her. Then, without giving either of them time to react, he took both of their hands and told them not to act so tense, since they were about to become husband and wife. With a pleased smile spreading across his face, the village chief brought their hands together, as though sealing the matter right there on the spot. He even complimented them with satisfaction, saying the two of them looked like a fine couple, and just like that, he declared that everything was settled. The young man still stood there without understanding the language, but little by little, the pieces of the situation began connecting in his mind. That was when he suddenly remembered Santa Claus and the strange promise about giving him a pure wife and a lovely daughter. And now, right in front of him, there was a wife who looked as frightened as a little rabbit, while behind her the daughter curled close like a tiny adorable hamster hiding beside her mother. Jo-won could not help wondering whether that Santa Claus had actually been real, and whether his ridiculous wish had somehow been granted after all. But even if his wish really had come true, he still could not understand why receiving it had required him to be thrown into an entirely different world. He silently questioned whether there had truly been no easier way to deliver a gift without forcing him through fear, hunger, and all that brutal hardship. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became, and in his heart he swore that if he ever met Santa Claus again, he would absolutely make him pay. In his imagination, he saw himself like a raging bear towering over everything, while the woman and the little girl looked like small, frightened animals trembling before him. Later, outside the house, the young man found himself standing among the villagers, but every word coming from their mouths meant absolutely nothing to him. The situation was enough to drive him mad, because no matter how hard he listened, he could not understand even a single part of their conversation. The village chief and two other men stood nearby, staring at him while speaking among themselves, almost as if they were discussing what should happen to him next. Then one of the villagers stepped closer and stretched out his hand, making Jo-won pause as he wondered whether this was supposed to be a handshake. Jo-won decided to accept the gesture and reached out in return, but the moment their hands met, he realized the other man's grip was surprisingly powerful. The villager suddenly winced in pain, while Jo-won blinked in confusion, wondering if crushing someone's hand was just the normal way people greeted each other here. With a serious, thoughtful expression on his face, he tried to make sense of the strange scene unfolding around him in this unfamiliar village. Finally, Jo-won released the man's hand, and the villager immediately staggered backward, shouting something that Jo-won still could not understand. While the villager complained loudly about the pain, the village chief burst into laughter at the absurd situation. Nearby, the man dropped to one knee with his hand glowing, and the chief placed a bow and arrow into Jo-won's hands. Jo-won stared down at the weapon he had just been given, standing there with no proper reaction as the hunting tool rested awkwardly in his grip. He wondered why they had suddenly handed him a bow, though judging from their expressions, it did not seem like they were asking him to start a fight. The chief then began gesturing wildly with both hands, putting his whole body into the motion as he desperately tried to explain what he wanted. When the older man raised his hands beside his head to imitate rabbit ears, Jo-won finally began to understand the meaning behind the strange performance. At last, it clicked in his mind. The villagers were not challenging him at all. They wanted him to learn how to hunt for the village. The village chief looked genuinely surprised when he realized the newcomer had actually managed to understand his clumsy mime, smiling with satisfaction. The chief pointed toward the forest, clearly showing Jo-won the direction where the hunt was supposed to begin. Not long after that, a white rabbit appeared in the grass nearby, calmly nibbling on leaves as if it had no idea it had just become the target. The village chief immediately pointed at the rabbit and shouted for Jo-won to shoot. But Jo-won had never used a bow in his life. All he could think of was Olympic archery, and from what he remembered, even trained athletes made it look difficult, let alone a total beginner like him. Even so, Jo-won tightened his grip, pulled the bowstring back with all the strength he had, and focused hard on the small white target ahead. To everyone's surprise, the arrow flew straight and struck the rabbit dead on, leaving the poor creature no time at all to react. The village chief stared in shock at Jo-won's aim, while Zhou himself stood there wondering how on earth he had just managed to do that. Still unable to believe what had happened, the newly appointed hunter remained frozen in place, silently processing the scene in front of him. Then his eyes shifted, and he noticed his new wife and her daughter returning toward the clearing from a short distance away. A bead of sweat slid down his face as he watched the two of them slowly approach, making the whole situation feel suddenly even more real. And in that moment, Zhou finally understood that this beautiful woman standing before him truly was his bride. Heat rushes up into his face before he can stop it, and for a moment he feels completely caught off guard. Deep inside his chest, an unfamiliar warmth slowly begins to rise, strange enough that even he does not know how to react to it. The people around him quickly notice the change in his expression, but none of them can figure out what has suddenly gotten into him. Not long after that awkward moment passes, this brand new family gathers together for their very first meal under the same roof. The woman carefully ladles the food into bowls, setting one in front of her new husband and another before the little girl. Her movements are quiet and gentle, as if this simple meal means far more than just filling their stomachs. What sits before them is only a plain stew, nothing luxurious or fancy. Yet the steam rising from the bowl makes it look warm, hearty, and surprisingly nourishing. Even at a glance, it seems like the kind of food that could bring comfort after a long day. The young man slowly lifts his spoon, but instead of eating right away, his gaze drifts toward the woman and the child sitting across from him. Both of them watch him with quiet curiosity, waiting to see how he will react to their humble meal. At last, he takes a taste of the stew. The moment the flavor reaches him, his expression changes so unexpectedly that the woman and the little girl both freeze in surprise, unsure what his reaction truly means. Without offering a single word, the protagonist lowers his head and continues eating the stew placed before him. Spoonful after spoonful, he quietly keeps going, letting his actions speak more honestly than any explanation could. Then, almost without realizing it, a small smile softens his face. It is not loud or dramatic, but that gentle expression makes it clear that he truly enjoys the meal they have prepared for him. For him, the word family had always felt far away, like something belonging to other people. From his teenage years all the way into his 30s, it had remained distant, unreachable, and strangely hollow. But now, even someone like him has suddenly been given people to look after. A woman and a child are right here beside him, and for the first time he has a family he can care for and protect with his own hands. A part of him thinks it would have been better if they had slowly grown into a family in a more natural way. But at this point, the order no longer matters as much as the bond beginning to form between them. He lifts his eyes toward the open sky, quietly thinking that he still wants to settle things with Santa Claus someday. Yet at the same time, deep down, the protagonist sincerely gives thanks for this unexpected gift of a real family. By the next day, everything begins moving at a much faster pace. Before there is even time to fully adjust to this new life, the three of them are already setting out together on a journey. With a heavy sack slung over him, he keeps walking ahead for a while before glancing back over his shoulder. That is when he notices the woman and the child struggling behind him, their steps growing slower and more unsteady. The long forest trail has clearly worn them down. The woman's breathing looks heavy, and the little girl's small legs can barely keep pace as exhaustion settles over both of them. That sight frustrates him more than he expects, because he cannot even ask if they are all right. The language barrier stands between them like a wall, leaving him unable to say the simplest words of concern. Because of that helpless feeling, he makes up his mind on the spot. If he wants to survive here and protect them properly, then he needs to adapt to this unfamiliar world as quickly as possible. At that moment, a memory of his mother rises in his mind. He remembers how she once told him that when he wants to protect someone, he should never hesitate or overthink it. His mother had always said that the instant the desire to protect appears in his heart, that is the very moment he must move. Waiting too long would only leave behind regret. Carrying that memory with him, the young man steadies his resolve and continues forward. His steps become firmer, and the hesitation in his heart slowly gives way to a new determination. Then, all of a sudden, the two behind him come to a stop. The little girl reaches out with trembling hands and clings tightly to the edge of her mother's skirt. Tears gather in the little girl's eyes as her strength finally gives out. She cries from sheer exhaustion, unable to force her small body to take even one more step along the trail. Seeing her break down like that, Zhou immediately lowers himself to one knee in front of her. In the gentlest way he can, he tries to tell her not to be scared, because he only wants to carry her for a while. But the girl's mother instantly panics when she sees him move closer. Her body stiffens, her face fills with alarm, and she looks terrified of what he might be about to do. desperate to stop the misunderstanding, she hurriedly says something in her own language. Her voice is urgent, almost pleading, but to him every word is completely impossible to understand. The frightened little girl begins crying even harder, overwhelmed by the sudden tension around her. Jo-won is startled by how badly they react, and he immediately regrets wearing such a serious expression in the first place. With no other way to explain himself, the protagonist awkwardly apologizes as best he can. Then, instead of only lifting the child, he simply scoops both the woman and the little girl up together in one smooth motion. The woman and the child are left utterly stunned as they are lifted off the ground at the same time. Their eyes widen, and for a moment, neither of them seems able to process what just happened. Still shocked by his strength, the woman and the little girl instinctively cling to him for balance. Their hands tighten against him, surprised that this young man can carry them so easily. Without showing the slightest strain, the protagonist holds them securely in his arms and begins walking again. Step by step, he continues along the path as if carrying two people is no trouble at all. The lady can only stare in silence, completely speechless at what her new husband has just done. His sudden, unexpected kindness leaves her unable to find a single word. Jo-won carefully shifts their weight in his arms, making sure they are held more comfortably for the long road ahead. Even while walking, he pays attention to how they are positioned so they will not feel uneasy. After a while, the little girl slowly looks up at him. In a small, curious voice, she calls him Avari, as if testing the word while studying his face. The young man turns his eyes toward her, clearly confused by what she has just said. The word means nothing to him, and his expression shows that he has no idea how he should respond. Even so, he gives a gentle smile and turns his attention to his new wife. In a soft tone, he asks her to hold on to him tightly so she will not feel unsafe while he carries them. As he keeps moving forward, he realizes something strange. Even with the luggage weighing him down, and both of them riding against him, their combined weight hardly feels heavy at all. That thought makes him decide what he must do next. He needs to learn their language, and he needs to master hunting as well, so he can properly feed and support his new family. From this point on, he understands that his life will no longer be quiet or simple. There will be far more work, far more responsibility, and far more things he has to learn than ever before. The woman gazes at him with tears shining in her eyes. His kindness, his strength, and the way he carries them without complaint seem to move her more deeply than he realizes. And so their journey continues down the forest path, with the young man carrying his new family in his arms. Though the road ahead is uncertain, the three of them move forward together. At last, they arrive in front of a small cabin tucked away from the road. The village chief stops there with them and gives his farewell, leaving the new family at the place that will become their home. After that, the older man turns and walks away, his figure gradually disappearing from sight. Only the new couple and the child remain behind, standing alone before their house. The protagonist looks over the cabin from the outside, taking in its rough wooden walls and quiet, lonely appearance. Just from standing near it, he gets the impression that the place must be terribly cold. A chill seems to crawl over his skin and his body gives an involuntary shiver. It immediately reminds him of one thing he has always hated from the bottom of his heart, being cold. Even with that uncomfortable thought lingering in his mind, he still steps toward the entrance. Taking a breath, he prepares himself to walk into this small cabin and face his new home. The hunter reaches for the door and opens it slowly, the wood creaking as he pushes it inward. Then he leans in and peers carefully inside the modest wooden house. Inside, the woman is already waiting for him. Her eyes are wet with tears, and her hands are clasped together as if in prayer, making her look both anxious and deeply apologetic. Jo-won is completely confused by the sight of her crying like that. He asks why tears are running down her face, but the lady gives no answer and only remains there in silence. Then, without warning, the woman suddenly turns and rushes deeper into the house. The protagonist is left standing behind her, still unable to understand what just happened or why she reacted that way. He looks further inside the cabin and finally begins to understand the situation. The shelves are bare, there is almost nothing stored away, and the entire house is in a messy, neglected state. Standing frozen at the doorway, the young man can only stare into the cabin in disbelief. Everything inside has been overturned, scattered, and stripped away, as if someone had stormed through the little home and ransacked every corner. Outside the cabin, the lady quietly explains what happened as best she can. While she had been away in the village, everything they owned had been taken from them, leaving the house empty and ruined. The man's chest tightens with worry as he realizes how serious the situation is. The cold season is drawing closer, and right now, he has almost nothing he can use to protect his new family from what is coming. After searching around, he finally spots his wife sitting alone on the grass. Relief flashes across his face as he approaches her and says in his own way that he has finally found her. The hunter lowers himself beside her and sits down quietly on the grass. For a brief moment, neither of them says anything, and the silence between them feels heavy but strangely gentle. Then, with a careful and gentle motion, he reaches out and pats the woman on the head. She lifts her eyes toward him in surprise, her expression wavering as if that small touch has moved her more than she expected. His hand is not rough or forceful at all. The touch is soft, warm, and comforting, silently telling her that he is worried about her and that her pain matters to him. The young man softly tells her not to worry, even though his words do not fully reach her. The young woman looks at him with uncertain eyes, wondering if that gentle expression is what he is trying to say. With a heavy feeling weighing down her heart, she quietly thinks about the reality in front of her. This man, still almost a stranger to her, is now the person she must live with from this day onward. Fear creeps in as she thinks about how impossible their situation feels. They cannot properly speak to each other, and he barely knows how to hunt well enough to survive in this harsh land. The lady cannot help questioning whether the three of them can really make it together. In a place this cold, poor, and unforgiving, even surviving from one day to the next feels uncertain. Just then, a confident smile slowly spreads across the protagonist's face. He looks straight at her with steady eyes, as if he has already made up his mind and refuses to back down. With complete certainty in his voice and expression, he promises that he will protect her from anything that tries to hurt her. Even if the words are simple, his resolve is impossible to miss. Even with all the fear and doubt still tangled inside her, the woman's heart begins to feel a little lighter. She looks at him quietly as if his confidence has given her something small to hold on to. Surrounded by despair and with their home left in ruins, she cannot understand why his words affect her so deeply. Yet, somehow, just hearing him say it makes her feel relieved. The young man then thinks back on the life he has lived until now. Ever since his parents passed away, he has been alone, carrying everything on his own without anyone truly beside him. Even through hardship after hardship, he had still managed to survive. No matter how lonely things became, he kept moving forward and found a way to continue living. And now that he has finally been given a family, there is no reason for him to give up. If he endured everything alone before, then surely he can endure even more for their sake now. He silently makes a firm promise to himself and to them. No matter what happens from here on out, he will find a way to support this family and keep them alive. His words reach the woman's heart, and she can no longer hold everything back. Tears begin to fall softly from her eyes as her emotions finally spill over. Seeing her break down, the young man gently pulls her into his arms. He holds her close, trying to comfort her in the only way he can during such an overwhelming moment. When the little girl sees the two of them like that, she immediately runs toward them in alarm. Her small voice cries out in her own language as she hurries across the grass. The girl throws her arms tightly around her mother, clinging to her with all her strength. Through her tears, she begs the man not to hurt Riji, her frightened voice filled with worry. And so, the new family remains there together, caught in a confusing but deeply emotional embrace. The mother and daughter stay within the protector's arms, wrapped in both fear and fragile comfort. The young man quietly reflects on the strange situation unfolding around him. In his arms is a woman crying with all the pain she has been holding back. Right beside them, there is also a child crying because she cannot understand what is happening. The confusion, fear, and misunderstanding all pile together in one messy moment. Countless questions rush through his mind all at once. But no matter how badly he wants answers, the language barrier gives him no way to ask or understand the truth. Even so, he makes another promise deep in his heart. He will make her the happiest person he possibly can, and he will do everything in his power to never make her cry again. Jo-won swears to himself that he will become a good husband and a good father. He wants to protect them so well that neither Riji nor the little girl will ever regret becoming his family. Later, the cabin looks completely different from before. The house has been repaired and cleaned up, and outside, stacks of firewood are neatly piled up, ready to help them face the cold. Inside, the protagonist sits on the floor and quietly thinks about where things stand between them. After everything that happened, it feels like their relationship has returned to the very beginning. In some ways, he feels like a stranger to them all over again. But strangely enough, that does not feel entirely bad to him, because starting over also means they can build things properly this time. Then an idea suddenly comes to the hunter. If he wants to close the distance between them, he needs to begin with something simple, something even people without a shared language can understand. He raises a hand and gestures to catch the attention of the woman and the child. When they both look at him with curious eyes, he points directly at himself. The young man clearly says his own name out loud for them to hear. He repeats it with enough care that they can understand this is what they should call him. He thinks that if they are going to live together from now on, then at the very least they need to know each other's names. Without that, they cannot even take the first real step as a family. The woman and the child stare at him in surprise, taken aback by his sudden attempt to communicate. Their new family member's attitude feels unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. Then the protagonist extends his hand toward the lady and gently asks for her name as well. His expression remains patient, showing that he is willing to wait until she understands. After a brief hesitation, the woman answers softly that her name is Rigi. The young man listens closely, focusing on every sound so he will not miss it. She repeats the name again, this time more clearly and with a little more confidence. At that moment, the protagonist finally understands that this is the name of the woman beside him. A warm smile appears on his face, and he tells her that Rigi is a very beautiful name. Then his gaze shifts toward the little girl, and he points to her next. Jo-won turns his full attention to the child and gently asks what her name is. His tone is soft, trying not to frighten her as he waits for an answer. The little girl looks toward her mother instead of answering, and the air suddenly grows heavy. Seeing the sadness in the child's eyes, the young man slowly realizes the painful truth. She still does not have a name of her own. The protagonist falls silent for a moment, unsure what he should do. He looks at the little girl carefully, thinking about how he can give her something meaningful. Then, with a tender gesture and a softened expression, he makes his decision. If she does not have a name yet, then he will give her one himself. He calls her Dorothy, remembering the young girl from The Wizard of Oz. The name comes to him naturally, carrying the feeling of a child setting out into a wide and unfamiliar world. The young man explains that Dorothy was like a girl who went on adventures and met many friends along the way. To him, that name carries the hope that this child will also find warmth around her. He continues, saying that in the end, she finds her own happiness and grows into a lovely child. It is more than just a name. It is a quiet wish for the future he wants her to have. The little girl softly repeats her new name, testing the sound of Dorothy with innocent curiosity. Jo-won smiles and promises that he will bring her many friends, plenty of love, and a happier life. With that, the little one now named Dorothy breaks into a radiant smile. Her face lights up with pure happiness, as if receiving a name has given her a small but precious place in this new family. Outside the house, the newly married man rolled up his sleeves and set himself to work, raising an axe and bringing it down again and again as he began chopping firewood. From a hidden spot nearby, Rigi quietly watched him move, her eyes fixed on his back as she thought to herself that this man was truly strange in every possible way. She found herself comparing him to the man who had died before, realizing that although Jo-won was larger and more imposing, the way he treated her was unexpectedly gentle and full of kindness. The more she watched him, the more Rigi understood that he was nothing like the people she had known before, and that difference made him stand out even more clearly in her heart. In the quiet of her own thoughts, she softly repeated his name, Jo-won, and remembered the calm, refined sound of his voice whenever he spoke to her. As she stood there, memories of everything she had endured came flooding back, and Rigi realized she had never once been given this much warmth or goodness by anyone. A faint smile slowly appeared on her face, and while watching him work, she could not help wondering why this strange man was treating her with such unexpected care. Rigi kept staring at him from where she hid, feeling more and more that Jo-won somehow did not quite belong in this place, as if he had stepped in from somewhere far away. Then, all of a sudden, Jo-won noticed her watching. His face brightened with a smile, and he lifted his hand, waving toward her while calling out her name to catch her attention. Rigi froze in surprise, and as Jo-won looked straight at her, she suddenly noticed the deep black color of his eyes and the dark shade of his hair. At that moment, a certain rumor came back to her mind, the story of a distant country trapped in war, a country that had supposedly succeeded in summoning a hero. According to that legend, the hero who had appeared was said to possess completely black hair and eyes, a feature so rare that people could not stop talking about it. While those thoughts swirled inside her head, Jo-won slowly walked toward her, his expression soft, curious, and gentle enough that it made her even more unsure of herself. Rigi quietly admitted that he did resemble the description from the rumor, at least a little, but she still found it hard to believe something that unbelievable could be true. After all, a hero from legend would never casually appear in a place like this, and to her, that whole story still sounded like nothing more than a simple rumor. Soon, the two of them ended up standing directly in front of each other, both completely still, with an awkward silence stretching between them, like neither knew what to do next. As Jo-won came closer, Riji grew visibly nervous, staring up at him with wide eyes, while her heart began pounding faster inside her chest. Now that she could see him from such a close distance, she confirmed it clearly. His hair really was black, and so were those calm eyes looking back at her. For some reason, a quiet sense of relief spread through Riji's body, and she wondered why being near him made her feel so strangely comforted. She could not understand it at all. Jo-won was still someone she had only just met, yet standing near him made her feel far more relaxed than she expected. Her own reaction left her confused, while Jo-won simply looked at her in silence, clearly unable to understand what was going through her mind. Then, the hunter gently lifted his hand and affectionately stroked the top of her head, causing Riji to stiffen a little as she found the gesture completely unfamiliar. The only memories she had of a man touching her head were painful ones, moments filled with cruelty and mistreatment, yet this touch felt so warm that she quietly wished he would keep doing it a little longer. A soft sense of safety settled over her, and Riji wanted his hand to remain there just like that. Seeing her reaction, Jo-won blushed slightly, but he still continued stroking her head with careful tenderness. Then, almost before she could prepare herself, Jo-won leaned down toward her and surprised her with a soft, gentle kiss placed right on her forehead. That small kiss left Riji completely stunned. She stood there speechless, her eyes wide, unable to process the sudden affection he had just shown her. Jo-won quickly pulled back, looking utterly embarrassed, while Riji remained frozen in place, staring at him as if she had just witnessed something impossible. The atmosphere turned painfully awkward in an instant, and Jo-won started stumbling over his words, his face tense as he struggled to figure out what he was supposed to say. Acting purely on impulse, he suddenly reached for a wooden bucket nearby, grabbing it as if finding something to do might save him from the embarrassment. He tightened his grip around the handle, clearly desperate for any excuse that would let him escape from the situation as quickly as possible. Without giving himself another second to think, the hunter abruptly ran off, leaving his wife standing behind him in stunned silence. Riji stayed where she was, her face turning a deep shade of red, while her heart hammered wildly from the unexpected kiss and his sudden escape. Meanwhile, Jo-won cursed himself in his own mind, panicking over what she must be thinking after he acted so suddenly and awkwardly. He reminded himself that even though they were technically married, they had only met that very day, and that realization made his thoughts even more tangled. To make everything even more complicated, the two of them could not even speak the same language, leaving Jo-won completely lost about what he should do next. As he kept walking, the hunter wondered if the best choice was simply to pretend nothing had happened and carry on like normal. But then he suddenly stopped in his tracks, looking around as he realized he had walked farther than intended and no longer knew exactly where he had ended up. After a moment, Jo-won decided he might as well fetch some water while he was already out here, then return home as fast as he could. Just then, a strange presence brushed against his senses, and Jo-won immediately went alert, his body tensing as he prepared for danger. From within the shadows ahead, a massive wolf stepped into view, its huge body emerging slowly while its red eyes glowed fiercely in the darkness. The creature curled its lips back, exposing rows of sharp teeth, and let out a low, threatening growl as if it could attack at any moment. Even though cold sweat began forming on Jo-won's skin, he stood his ground before the beast, refusing to show even the smallest trace of fear. Jo-won was shocked by the animal's enormous size, and in that tense moment, he fully understood that the monster in front of him was a real wolf. Keeping himself as calm as possible, he crouched down near his fallen bucket and noticed a piece of wood lying on the ground close beside it. Without wasting a second, Jo-won snatched up the piece of wood, gripping it like a makeshift club as he prepared to defend himself against the wolf. The giant wolf suddenly sprang forward, launching its massive body at him, but Jo-won charged in as well, raising the club and meeting the attack head-on. The beast snapped its jaws around the piece of wood, and with one brutal bite, its sharp teeth crushed and shattered the makeshift weapon apart. With a furious shout, Jo-won drove his fist forward and slammed a direct punch straight into the wild animal's head. The blow landed cleanly against the wolf, striking it with full force and making the creature feel the heavy impact of Jo-won's attack. But in the next instant, the wolf sank its teeth into Jo-won's arm, and the hunter cried out in pain as the bite tore into him. Even with the wolf's teeth sunk into him, Jo-won refused to collapse there. Gritting through the pain, he pulled back his fist and slammed another punch into the beast, determined not to let this thing be the end of him. With a fierce shout tearing from his throat, Joe drove his strength forward, and in that instant, his clenched fist suddenly began shining with an intense blue light. The glowing punch crashed into the wolf with a force it clearly never expected, and the beast let out a painful howl as the strange, magical blow struck it head-on. But right after that, Joe-Won's entire body suddenly flared with fire, flames bursting across him as he screamed out in agony from the shocking heat. His eye widened in pure disbelief, and for a moment, Joe-Won could only stare in panic, completely unable to understand what was happening to his own body. Then the wolf's mouth began catching fire as well, flames licking around its jaws, and Joe-Won was left stunned by the bizarre sight unfolding right in front of him. Joe-Won lowered his gaze to his own arm, watching the flames wrap around it, and his face filled with complete disbelief as he tried to make sense of it. Before he could think too deeply, Joe-Won climbed onto the wolf's back and started hammering its head with his burning fist, using the flames as his only weapon. He kept swinging again and again, putting every bit of strength he had into each blow as he struck the wild animal without giving it a chance to recover. Each flaming punch landed directly on the wolf, the impacts bursting against its head while the beast struggled helplessly, unable to defend itself from the sudden assault. At last, the massive wolf collapsed onto the ground and stopped moving, while Joe-Won stood over it, breathing heavily and trembling from exhaustion. Lying back on the grass, Joe-Won stared upward and tried to understand what had just happened, unable to forget the sight of his own arm engulfed in flames. But when he checked his arm and looked over his clothes, he found no burns at all, not even the slightest trace that the fire had harmed him. He placed a hand over his face, still shaken, and began wondering if he had somehow used real magic without even realizing it. Then he thought back to the guards from before, and a new realization hit him. Maybe when he came to this world, he had gained powers of his own. After all, in stories about people being sent to another world, gaining some kind of special power was practically something that always happened. Still lying there in the grass, Joe-Won covered his face as his thoughts raced. And if that really was the case, then maybe he could do even more. He suddenly raised one hand toward the air and shouted excitedly for a fireball to appear. But after all that dramatic effort, absolutely nothing happened. Joe-Won pushed himself back to his feet and kept trying to call out the magic, but no matter how hard he focused, his attempts led nowhere. He tried other spells too, shouting things like Firestorm and Firewall, hoping one of them would work, but every attempt failed just as completely as the first. One after another he called out different incantations, raising his hand with more and more frustration. Yet the result never changed at all. Eventually, Joe-Won's excitement faded into a dull, bored expression as he realized that magic was not something he could use just by wanting it badly enough. Even so, he knew the flames had not been an illusion, especially because the wounds on his body seemed to have healed slightly afterward. A hopeful thought began to grow in his mind. Maybe with this power, he could give his new family a happier life, one filled with warm meals and better days. Joe-Won also thought about the village, a place with no doctors, and imagined how useful it would be if he could learn to use magic to heal people. For now, he decided there was no point panicking. He would think calmly, because if that power had appeared once, then surely it might appear again someday. As he lay there, an old painful memory suddenly pulled him back to the funeral of his grandfather, which had happened not long after he had already lost his parents. His grandfather had still been healthy, but an accident took his life without warning. And after that, Joe-Won's uncle blamed him for the tragedy. His uncle accused him of causing the death of his only brother and even blamed him for losing his father too, throwing every cruel word straight at him. Back then, Joe-Won had fallen to the floor while his relatives shouted around him, calling him the source of every misfortune that had struck their family. To them, he was treated like a plague, someone who carried disaster wherever he went and brought suffering to anyone unlucky enough to be near him. Returning to the present, Joe-Won pushed those memories aside and knew he needed to drain the wolf's blood, but the thought of more beasts nearby made him uneasy. Not wanting to stay there any longer, Joe-Won hoisted the giant wolf over his shoulders and decided to head back home as quickly as he could. As he carried the heavy animal, he remembered how his grandfather used to butcher animals, and those old lessons now became unexpectedly useful to him. Under the pale moonlight, Joe-Won walked forward with the wolf on his back, quietly thinking that his grandfather would probably be proud to see him now. Still, another problem lingered in his mind. How exactly was he supposed to train this strange new magic while dragging a giant wolf home on his back? Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Regi and little Dorothy were busy moving around the house, quietly handling the chores that needed to be done. Dorothy soon came running over with bright energy, holding a bowl in her small hands as she excitedly brought it to her mother. Regi smiled warmly at her daughter, thanked her for helping, and gently patted the little girl's head with a soft, affectionate touch. That simple gesture made Dorothy's face light up instantly, her smile spreading wide from ear to ear as happiness filled her entire expression. Bursting with energy, the little girl ran around the house in high spirits, clearly delighted by the warmth of this new family life. But then Dorothy suddenly stopped at the doorway, her small body freezing in place as her eyes widened at whatever she saw outside. At the entrance, the enormous head of the giant wolf appeared before her, and the terrifying sight made the little girl scream in pure fear. The moment Regi heard Dorothy scream, she rushed over in panic, desperate to see what had frightened her daughter so badly. Without wasting even a second, Regi snatched a knife from the table, gripping it tightly as she prepared to defend herself and Dorothy from the danger. She dashed toward the door and shouted for Dorothy to get behind her, placing herself between the child and the threat without hesitation. In that moment, Regi's eyes burned with determination, making it clear that she was ready to protect the little girl no matter what it cost her. Then she saw Jo-Won standing there with the beast on him, and in her alarm she shouted his name, worried and confused by the shocking sight. Still holding the knife, Regi rushed forward to attack the wolf, not realizing in her panic that the massive creature had already been defeated. Exhausted from the long walk and startled by his wife's scream, Jo-Won let the wolf's carcass drop heavily to the ground in front of them. The moment they spot him, the two of them rush over in a panic. Seeing how shaken they are, the hunter quickly calls out their names, trying to steady their hearts before their fear can swallow them completely. Regi comes to a sharp stop right in front of him, her knife still gripped tightly in her hand. But the instant she takes in the bloody scene before her, her eyes go wide and she freezes there, completely stunned. Then, as the fear finally gives way to relief, Regi throws her arms around him and holds him close. He gently reassures her, telling her that even though he got injured, he is still all right. Little Dorothy rushes in right after her, clinging tightly to his leg with both arms. Tears spill down her face as all the terror and relief she had been holding back finally come out at once. With a soft smile, he tries to ease their worries, explaining that the wolf had only bitten his arm. It looked scary, but now that the danger had passed, everything was truly okay. Beneath the pale moonlight, the newly formed family sits together beside the fallen wolf. Even with the huge beast lying nearby, he keeps calmly telling them that he is fine. After a quiet moment, Regi says something to him in her own language. He does not understand the word at all, but for some reason the sound of it makes his whole face flush red. A second later, he realizes that she must be thanking him. The meaning finally sinks in, and warmth spreads through his chest as he feels the affection hidden in her awkward words. Little Dorothy speaks up as well, saying something in that same unfamiliar language. He cannot catch the exact meaning, but from her tearful face, he guesses she had been terribly worried about him too. Looking at their tear-stained faces, guilt quietly settles over him. He had promised himself he would never make them cry again. Yet, here he was, already breaking that promise so soon. As night deepens over the forest, a lone crow flutters down and lands on the roof of the cabin. Its dark silhouette stands out against the dim sky, watching over the quiet woods. Inside the house, Jo-Won gets to work on the wolf. With a sharp knife in hand, he begins skinning the massive beast, moving carefully so he does not waste anything. He guides the blade along with slow, precise movements, separating the giant animal's thick pelt from the meat beneath it. Every cut requires focus, strength, and patience. As he works, the hunter cannot help but admit that the task is far harder than he once believed. When his grandfather did it, the whole process had looked so effortless. Before long, exhaustion begins to weigh on him. Feeling the strain in his arms, he decides that if this ever happens again, he will definitely need to find a better way to handle it. Once the meat is finally separated, he steadies himself and prepares to bring the work to an end. After all that effort, he only needs to finish the last part properly. Just then, he suddenly hears someone calling his name. He turns toward the sound and finds Regi's silhouette standing at the doorway, watching him from the entrance. Sweat runs down his face as he looks up at her in surprise. He calls her name in return, silently wondering what brought her over at a moment like this. Regi steps closer with a wooden bucket held in both hands. Seeing her approach, the protagonist calls her name again, still not quite sure what she is trying to do. She says something he cannot understand, then gestures toward the meat and the bucket. From her movements, he quickly realizes that she wants him to put the meat inside. A small smile rises on his face as it finally clicks. Regi is not just standing there watching. She has come to help him carry the meat back into the house. Wanting to respond properly, The young man searches his memory for the right word. He struggles to remember how to say thank you in the language of this world. After a brief pause, he carefully tries to pronounce the word. The moment it leaves his mouth, Riji looks at him in surprise, clearly not expecting him to make the attempt. Then her expression softens, and a sweet smile blooms across her face. Seeing that gentle reaction, he realizes with relief that he must have pronounced the word correctly. Still, he starts to wonder if he somehow said something strange. For a moment, the two of them simply stand there facing each other, the air between them turning strangely awkward. With a gentle smile of her own, Riji slowly tries to say the word in his language. Her pronunciation is careful and uncertain, as if she is asking him whether she said it right. Hearing her try, the young man cannot help but smile sincerely. He thanks her for making the effort to learn his language, and his warm response leaves his wife a little flustered, staring at him without knowing how to answer. Then the hunter turns away to pick up the wooden bucket. As he does, Riji quietly thinks to herself that, before this moment, no one had ever thanked her like that. She bends down to help him with the meat, still caught on that simple word. In her heart, she cannot stop thinking that he thanked her for something as ordinary as bringing water. As the two of them walk together, Riji slowly realizes something strange and precious. Ever since meeting him, she has been experiencing so many gentle things for the very first time. At that moment, her thoughts drift back to the affection he had shown her earlier. She remembers the warmth of his lips softly touching her forehead. The memory alone is enough to make her face burn with embarrassment. Her heart begins to pound wildly in her chest, as if it has forgotten how to calm down. Even though the whole thing makes her feel unbearably shy, Riji still follows him into the house. Her embarrassment is strong, but her curiosity pulls her forward even more. As she walks behind him, she cannot stop wondering whether he has done this with other women before. And if he has, did they feel the same strange warmth she did? The more she thinks about it, the more her chest starts to ache. The mix of jealousy, confusion, and embarrassment becomes so overwhelming that she almost feels like crying. Inside the cabin, the man sets the things down on the table. But the moment Riji suddenly steps in after him, he jolts slightly, startled by her unexpected entrance. He quickly steps back to make space for her as she moves closer to the meat. To him, her sudden approach feels a little strange, and he watches her with puzzled eyes. Riji looks at the work before her and quietly thinks that chores like this should naturally fall to her. Yet the hunter behaves as if handling it himself is his responsibility. Before either of them fully realizes it, they end up holding the meat together. The young man looks directly at her, and an unexpected tense stillness settles between them. Riji moves a little closer to him, her nerves tightening with every small step. Her mind races as she wonders what she is supposed to do in a situation like this. Then the protagonist leans toward her, closing the distance between them. With him suddenly so near, Riji becomes even more anxious, her whole body stiffening from the closeness. But instead of doing anything more, he simply places another soft kiss on her forehead. Riji is left completely stunned, her face turning bright red, and she quickly steps back in embarrassment while inwardly cursing herself for closing her eyes. Panicking, Riji grabs at her own hair in frustration. Her thoughts spiral wildly as she fears that her husband might have believed she was asking for a kiss on the lips. With her face still burning red, she makes up her mind. This time, she will keep her eyes open no matter what, so her husband will not misunderstand her again. But then, completely unexpectedly, the hunter steps closer to her. Before she can prepare herself, he gives her a passionate kiss directly on the lips. Afterward, he gently pulls away with a calm, almost natural smile. Riji, on the other hand, remains frozen in place, completely paralyzed by the shock of what just happened. Then the young man turns around with the bucket in his hand. That is when he suddenly notices a tiny figure nearby. Little Dorothy has been secretly watching them. Little Dorothy had seen everything while spying from the side. The moment Riji realizes her daughter witnessed the whole scene, pure despair crashes over her. Mortified beyond words, Riji bolts away like a storm, leaving the protagonist standing there in total confusion. Later, the little family walks calmly through the sunlit forest, with Riji moving ahead of them. The man follows close behind, carrying the wooden bucket as he walks. Beside him, little Dorothy hurries along, trying her best to keep up with his much longer strides. At that moment, the hunter glances down and notices something small beside him. The child is stretching both of her tiny hands upward, trying, with all her might, to reach the large container he is carrying. Not quite understanding what she wants, the young man pauses in place and looks at her carefully. After watching her for a moment, he finally realizes that she simply wanted him to call her by her name too. The instant he does, The little girl's face lights up with a bright, radiant smile. She happily grips the edge of the object, looking as if she feels useful, needed, and deeply loved by her new father. The scene shifts back inside the cabin, where Riji is kneeling near the giant wolf pelt, spread across the wooden floor. Her fingers gently brush over the large hide, carefully petting the thick fur. Sitting just behind her, the protagonist quietly watches what she is doing. He tilts his head a little, wondering why she would choose to dry such a huge pelt indoors instead of outside. Then, all at once, realization strikes him. It is as if a light suddenly switches on in his mind, and he finally understands the real reason behind Riji's careful actions. He understands that this thick, soft wolf pelt must be something extremely valuable to his new wife, almost like a precious treasure. Right then, little Dorothy walks over to her mother, staring curiously at the huge, fuzzy rug on the floor. Unable to hold back her curiosity, the child reaches out and touches the beast's dark fur. Her little fingers sink into the soft texture, and she marvels at how fluffy the massive animal feels. As he watches the mother and daughter smiling together over the pelt, the young man feels a gentle warmth spread through his heart. Seeing his family safe, happy, and relaxed makes the cabin feel brighter than ever. The view then moves outside to the small wooden cabin, standing quietly among the trees, tucked deep in the mountain forest, as if protected by the surrounding greenery. Inside, Riji works with patient hands, carefully rubbing salt into 2 tender pieces of meat. Her movements are steady and practiced, making sure the meat is properly prepared. Watching her from the side, the young man begins to understand how meat is cured in this world, and he quietly decides to learn the process. Meanwhile, Riji's face carries a pleased smile, clearly happy that she managed to save such useful fat. Seeing all of this, the hunter reflects on just how much he still has to learn. This different world is full of things he does not understand yet, even in the simplest parts of daily life. His eyes drift back toward the wolf pelt lying nearby. Looking at it, he starts wishing he could quickly understand how valuable goods and trades worked in this place. With that thought in mind, the man stretches his body and lets out the stiffness from resting. He decides he has recovered enough and that it is time to get back to work. He suddenly rises to his feet with surprising speed, and the sudden movement makes his wife flinch in surprise, especially since she had been standing right behind him. Worried about his injury, Riji quickly waves both hands at him, clearly trying to tell her husband to sit back down and rest a little longer. But the young man only gives her a reassuring smile. He gestures calmly to show that he is fine now, and that the pain is no longer bothering him at all. Then, with a gentle touch on her shoulder, the hunter quietly reassures her even more. He makes it clear that he will not force himself or push his body beyond its limits. After that, he turns and heads toward the door. Riji is left standing there in silence, completely speechless from the way he tries to ease her worries with such care. Out in the forest, the man walks among the trees until he finds a large trunk that looks perfect for practicing his swing and testing his strength. He looks down at his reflection on the surface of the axe blade, trusting the raw strength in his body even though he has almost no real experience using the tool. Without wasting another second, the protagonist grips the heavy axe firmly in both hands. He raises it with determination, preparing himself for a powerful strike. With a sharp shout of effort, he swings the heavy blade down with all the power he has. But his strength is far beyond what he expected, and the entire tree snaps apart at once before crashing heavily onto the dirt. Terrified by the sudden destruction, the young man crouches down and shields his head with both arms. He stares in shock, completely unable to understand what just happened. Sometime later, the husband pushes open the cabin door and steps back inside. In his arms, he carries a basket packed full of freshly chopped firewood. When the mother and daughter see the huge amount of wood he brought back, their eyes widen in disbelief. They are both completely stunned by the hunter's speed and incredible strength. The husband enters the cabin with the giant wooden basket in his arms, and Riji immediately rushes toward him in worry, hurrying over as if to welcome him and check on him at the same time. Feeling the fatigue finally catch up with him, the protagonist suddenly drops down and sits on the floor. His wife looks at him in confusion, startled by the unexpected action. Riji quickly takes hold of his hands, anxiously checking whether he has hurt himself somewhere. The hunter immediately reassures her, making it clear that nothing is wrong. Just then, little Dorothy appears beside him with a cloth in her small hands. She offers it to her new father so he can wipe the sweat from his face. Right after handing it over, the little girl suddenly dashes across the room in excitement. Her energetic behavior leaves the young man watching her with surprised, amused eyes. She rushes over to a large wooden bucket filled with clean water. With a happy little expression, she dips both of her tiny hands into the water. Then she turns and runs straight back toward the hero. As she hurries across the floor, her wet feet leave a trail of small footprints behind her. Without giving him any warning, his daughter leaps right onto the big man's chest. Her wet little hands press against his clothes, leaving tiny marks behind. The protagonist is startled for a moment, but that surprise quickly turns into a wide, helpless smile. Seeing his little girl play so cutely makes his heart soften instantly. Watching the whole thing unfold, Riji cannot hold back anymore and bursts into a hearty laugh. In an instant, the atmosphere inside the cabin becomes light, warm, and full of fun. The little one then looks up at the man with big, bright eyes. She stares at him expectantly, clearly waiting to see how her new father will react. With deep tenderness, the father reaches out and gently pats the girl on the head, thanking her for taking care of him. But that praise makes Dorothy even more excited, and she starts racing non-stop around the kitchen, while he hurriedly asks her to stop. Seeing her run around like that, the young man and his wife both break into laughter. The happiness filling the room feels so perfect that it almost seems like a beautiful dream. He pulls the young woman into a warm hug, holding her close as he quietly promises in his heart to protect those smiles. Never in his life had he imagined he could feel this happy. The scene then shifts outside once more, showing the small cabin resting peacefully in the middle of the vast, lush forest. Thick smoke rises from the stone chimney and drifts into the evening air. The warm glow from the cabin makes it clear that night has arrived and dinner is ready. Inside, the two adults sit together, enjoying what feels like a true feast. Nearby, their daughter has already fallen asleep peacefully right there on the floor. Suddenly, Riji and her husband both stop eating at the same time. A small noise comes from beneath the dining table, making them glance down in surprise. There, adorable Dorothy has completely dozed off in the middle of the wonderful meal. She sleeps soundly while hugging her own spoon like it is something precious. Faced with such an adorable sight, the couple cannot help bursting into laughter together. For a little while, they simply enjoy the quiet warmth of that peaceful moment. Very carefully, the hero bends down toward the sleeping child. Moving as gently as possible, he lifts little Dorothy into his arms without waking her. Then he slowly stands with the sleeping girl held securely against him. From nearby, his wife watches the two of them with a soft, affectionate gaze. Carrying the little one carefully in his arms, the big man walks closer to the fireplace. He brings her near the gentle heat, wanting the fire to warm her small body. After that, the new father carefully lowers the little girl onto the bed, moving with such tenderness that it feels as if he is afraid even the mattress might disturb her sleep. As the night deepens, the quiet forest sinks further into darkness, and only the small pantry outside remains faintly lit beneath the still, lonely glow. Meanwhile, the young wife stands by the hot pan, boiling a cloth in the water so she can properly wipe down and clean the household things. But just as she focuses on her work, her husband suddenly appears behind her, stepping into the kitchen so quietly that she never hears him coming. Without giving her any warning, the hunter reaches out and gently wraps his hand around the girl's wrist, quietly stopping her from doing any more chores. Startled by the sudden touch, the wife turns her head at once, her eyes widening as she looks up at him, completely unsure of what he is trying to do. The young man's face turns faintly red as he gazes down at her with a deep, softened look. For a moment the two of them stand incredibly close, surrounded only by the dim warmth of the room's weak light. After gathering every bit of courage she has, the young lady slowly lifts her hand and presses the clean cloth against his neck, carefully wiping away the sweat from the big man's skin. Her movements are light and careful, almost shy, yet every small motion shows just how much affection she is trying to pour into caring for him. Inside her heart, the young woman fights back her embarrassment, reminding herself that looking after one's partner is simply what a good wife is supposed to do. Carried by that gentle thought, she quietly lifts the edge of her husband's shirt and begins drying the sweat from his firm, well-defined abdomen. The protagonist does nothing to stop her. He simply watches this unexpected side of his partner in silence, letting himself be cared for by her soft hands. Soon, a calm and sweet smile spreads across the hunter's face, making it obvious that he is enjoying this tender little moment far more than he expected. But then reality suddenly catches up to the lady. The moment she realizes exactly what she has just done, she panics and starts waving her hands in front of her face, mortified by her own boldness. Seeing how flustered and adorable she looks, the hero gently takes both of her hands in his, holding them with quiet affection to calm her trembling nerves. At that moment, he leans his face a little closer to hers, still holding her hands tenderly, as if trying to reassure her without saying much at all. The young woman's heart instantly begins pounding like crazy, and with him so close, She becomes so nervous that she can barely keep herself still. Then the young man finally breaks the silence, speaking in a soft and gentle voice as he suggests that the two of them should go to sleep soon. And so the newly married couple leaves together, walking hand in hand toward a small room outside where a faint light waits for them. Once inside, the two lie down on the wooden floor across from each other, with a small lamp placed between them, its glow quietly filling the narrow space. Then the hero slowly leans over the lady, and she instinctively gulps, feeling the air between them grow warmer and heavier with every passing second. She stares up at him with wide, anxious eyes, a trace of fear flickering across her face as she wonders what might happen next. The wife takes a deep breath, trying her best to loosen the tension in her body as she silently waits for her partner's gentle touch. He then kisses her with incredible sweetness. And in that quiet moment, he cannot help thinking about how unbelievably soft the girl's lips feel. Afterward, the big man looks toward the sleeping little girl nearby, silently wishing that this new family of his could stay by his side for a very, very long time. Deep in his heart, the man quietly pleads with the old man, hoping that these two precious people can remain happy until the very last breath of his life. Meanwhile, Riji begins remembering that the nobles of this world live inside grand castles, surrounded by many rooms and plenty of private space. But for common people, life is nothing like that. Families have no choice but to sleep together in one cramped area, pressed close inside the same small home. Because of that, children often learn far too quickly what husbands and wives do together once night falls and the house grows quiet. At that moment, a terrible memory surges back into her mind, and along with it comes the frightening voice of her late father echoing from the past. Back then, the little girl would hide beneath the covers, shaking in silence, while she listened to her mother's sorrowful crying until dawn finally came. The young woman remembers living with that constant fear in her chest, terrified that the same dark and painful future would one day become her own. But the warm crackle of the fireplace gently pulls the girl back from those memories, and before she knows it, morning has already arrived. Riji opens her eyes in bed, confused for a moment, because she clearly remembers falling asleep on the cold wooden floor the night before. Then she realizes that her husband had offered his own arm as a pillow for her, and that small, thoughtful act leaves her deeply touched. A quiet breath of relief escapes the young woman, and she finally understands that nights between a husband and wife do not have to be frightening after all. Pressed against the hero's broad chest, she thinks about how completely her world has changed since meeting him, and how much warmer life feels now. With a peaceful smile on her face, the young wife nestles even closer into the strong man's warmth, letting herself relax inside that comforting embrace. A short while later, the hunter slowly wakes from his sleep and notices how affectionately his new wife has curled up against him. Only then does he realize that both the woman and the little girl are resting on his arms, using him like the safest pillow in the world. Riji's heart starts beating so wildly that it feels as if it might leap straight out of her mouth at any second. A warm feeling spreads through her chest, and from the bottom of her heart, the young woman wishes this gentle morning could last forever. The big man simply watches them in silence for a while, quietly savoring the peaceful beauty of that morning. Then, with great care, the protagonist rises and covers his little daughter with a thick, warm blanket. After that, he gently strokes the child's blonde hair, and the little girl lets out a sleepy mumble without waking up. Later, Riji walks over toward the fireplace, planning to pick up the empty metal bucket sitting nearby. But before her fingers can reach it, the young man's large hand closes around the handle first, easily taking hold of the heavy container. Riji is startled and takes a small step back, while her husband looks at her with the same gentle smile as if telling her not to worry. Full of energy, the hunter fills the large bucket himself, clean water splashing around as the container quickly grows heavy in his hands. With a calm expression, he then says a few words in the native language of this unfamiliar world, speaking as naturally as if the meaning should be obvious. His wife, however, is completely lost. She stares at him in confusion, trying hard to figure out what on earth the man was trying to tell her. Her cheeks flush bright red as she lowers her voice and mumbles something under her breath, leaving the young man staring at her in confusion, unable to understand why she suddenly became so shy. The hero quietly wonders if the affectionate way he addressed her just now was what made her freeze up and turn so nervous all of a sudden. After thinking it over for a moment, he realizes that the girl must have become embarrassed because he was treating her so naturally like his true wife. So the husband gently suggests that they use a sweeter nickname instead, and after blushing even harder, the young woman softly asks him to call her darling. The hunter obediently calls his wife darling, and the instant that tender word reaches her ears, her entire face burns red with unbearable embarrassment. Unable to face him directly, the lady quickly turns her back to hide her expression, but the redness spreading down her neck gives away just how nervous she really is. Seeing that adorable reaction, he cannot help finding her even cuter, and a playful thought rises in his mind as he decides to tease her just a little more. Then the young man gently places his hand against his partner's back and softly asks her to turn around and look into his eyes again. Just then, little Dorothy suddenly wakes up, rubbing her sleepy eyes while letting out a long yawn. Before she is even fully awake, her mind drifts toward the image of a giant piece of meat floating right in front of her. The little girl begins drooling from hunger as she imagines that delicious meal, and her stomach lets out a loud rumble. In the next moment, she drops onto the wooden floor and starts crawling quickly toward the couple. Right after that, their daughter rushes excitedly into her parents' arms, calling out to her brand new family with all the joy her tiny body can hold. The two adults are startled by the child's sudden burst of energy, but when they see how lively she is so early in the morning, warmth immediately fills their faces. But Dorothy's real attention is on the fresh meat nearby, and the moment she sees the feast laid out on the table, her eyes sparkle with pure happiness. Without hesitation, the little one tries to climb up onto a large wooden bucket, while her parents stand nearby watching her effort with gentle smiles. The protagonist suddenly bursts into laughter when he hears his daughter shouting for food at the top of her lungs, as if breakfast were the most urgent matter in the world. With her tiny legs kicking in the air, the girl struggles to reach the bottom of the container, desperately searching for a snack. Seeing that huge appetite, the hunter silently decides that he will work hard at hunting, so this home will never lack food again. Soon after, he walks through the thick forest with his axe in hand, feeling prepared to face even the fiercest wolf that might come charging at him. This time, the young man carries a far more reliable weapon, and his heart is firmly set on bringing back enough food to support his family. But all of a sudden, the atmosphere shifts, and the protagonist senses a strange presence hiding somewhere among the dark, crowded trees. He stops in place, his body growing tense, as he realizes the air around him has become heavy, suffocating, and strangely frightening. In that instant, the hunter wonders what kind of monstrous creature might appear this time, and whether it has come to test his strength once again. Then footsteps begin echoing through the shadowy forest, slow and deliberate, as a mysterious figure gradually approaches the protagonist. Confused and on guard, the hero breaks into a cold sweat, trying to understand who would be wandering around in such a remote place. At that moment, an old man wearing a hood steps out from the shadows, and the big guy immediately tightens his grip around the handle of his axe just in case. Beneath that dark hood, the stranger's gaze is stern and sharp, and he studies the young man in silence as if measuring every detail about him. Facing him directly, the young man cannot help wondering who this mysterious old man could be and why he has appeared in front of him so suddenly. The moment then shifts back into the past, revealing blood-stained as he discovered the scattered rocks in that very same forest. Standing at the spot, the elderly man carefully examines the enormous tracks on the ground and concludes that a giant beast must have passed through recently. He recalls watching the cabin for several days, and from what he observed, the new resident living there did not even seem to know how to hold a weapon properly. Because of that, the old man steps onto a rock with disbelief, finding it absurd that such an ignorant rookie could have taken down a monster. The gentleman shakes his head with a faint smile, knowing that even a seasoned hunter would struggle to survive if forced to face that kind of beast alone. Then his expression changes sharply, and he turns his head as a strange feeling tells him that something about this entire situation is deeply wrong. Driven by suspicion and curiosity, the man decides to move through the woods himself, determined to uncover the truth with his own eyes. Back in the present, the visitor continues walking forward at a slow pace, while the hunter keeps his body firm and ready in a guarded stance. The old man's eyes settle on the protagonist's injured arm, and the moment he notices something unusual there, a sharp light flashes in his gaze. He sees the clear marks left by the wolf's fangs, yet what shocks him most is that the wound has already healed to an almost impossible degree. In his mind, a bite like that should have caused a deadly infection, leaving the hero unable to even walk properly, let alone move through the forest. Because of that, the elderly man reaches a shocking conclusion, suspecting that this huge young man might actually be a mage. He remembers very well that people capable of using magic are incredibly rare in this world, so rare that ordinary people almost never encounter them at all. The young man remains standing there, sweat sliding down his face. completely unaware that the mysterious old man is silently forming a grand plan. Then the old man's eyes begin glowing with a frightening purple light, and a smile creeps across his face as he declares that his great chance has finally arrived. Deep inside, the elderly man believes the opportunity for revenge he has waited for all this time has finally come knocking right at his door. Meanwhile, the newcomer looks the stranger up and down, trying to figure out what kind of bizarre and suspicious old man is standing before him. As the past opens up again, the old man remembers that although he is now stubborn and weathered by age, he was once a powerful and vigorous warrior. Back in those days, force guards had to throw themselves into wars, earning merits through battle before they could become vassals of the nobles. Longing for independence, the young man left his father behind and traveled from village to village, determined to make a name for himself as a great hunter. Before long, he managed to secure a position as a guardian in a village surrounded by mountains, a place rich with valuable resources. However, that village had one serious problem. Firewood was scarce, because even ordinary commoners were allowed to enter the Lord's forest. Because of that, people were forced to venture deeper into the woods, which gave him the perfect excuse to explore and map the unknown terrain. But the warrior made one crucial mistake. He never stopped to ask why the villagers only dared to collect wood from the shallow edges of the forest. Lying on the ground, bruised and injured, he suddenly remembered the moment he had failed the test to become someone who could protect these lands. A guard was expected to stand strong with a whole body, and with his limbs no longer intact, that dream had been ripped away from him completely. The young man froze in pure terror, cold sweat pouring down his face as the reality in front of him sank in. No matter how cautious he had been, he never could have imagined that such a nightmare was waiting for him on that mountain. Right before his eyes, a massive green monster stepped into view, its ugly figure towering over him like a living nightmare. Only then did he understand that those horrifying creatures were the true rulers of the mountain peak. And the most sickening part was not even their appearance. Those filthy beasts had been kidnapping human women, dragging them away so they could create more of their own monstrous kind. When one of those creatures seized him by the shoulder, the guard finally understood the terrifying truth behind that cursed place. This was the reason everyone whispered about it as the Village of Monsters. Shaking uncontrollably from fear, he learned the darkest secret of the region in the cruelest way possible. The girls who kept disappearing had not simply vanished, they had been taken by the monsters hiding in the mountains. After somehow surviving that hell, the hunter lived on in misery, clinging to life with nothing but patience and hatred. Deep inside, he waited for the day he could finally take revenge on the creatures that had destroyed everything he once had. Even though he despised the spineless villagers who lived in that settlement, he forced himself to swallow his pride. For decades, he stayed among them, hiding his resentment while quietly enduring the life he had been left with. With tears of fury burning in his eyes, he held on only because of one twisted obsession. Someday, no matter how long it took, he would bring down every last one of those rotten monsters. Clutching a torch in his hand, the survivor made a vow from the bottom of his ruined heart. He would not rest until every nest those beasts had built was burned down to nothing but ash. Back in the present, the old man looked up at the big guy with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. After everything he had seen, he was absolutely convinced that this young man might be the one who could finally help him. The old hunter kept staring at the big guy, unable to hide how impressed he was. Around that village, he had never seen anyone with such an enormous build or such frightening raw strength. But it was not only the young man's body that shocked him. When the elderly man noticed the ridiculous healing ability in his arm, his eyes widened even more in disbelief. Because of that, the old gentleman reached a firm conclusion in his heart. This young man had the talent and the body to become the greatest monster hunter this place had ever known. In his mind, the old veteran knew better than anyone that the danger was far from over. Deep within those mountains, terrifying creatures were still lurking, waiting for their next chance. And once those monsters ran out of women to steal, he was certain they would come down again. Sooner or later, the beasts would attack the village, and another tragedy would begin. Before that disaster could happen, the old man made up his mind. He would personally train this outsider and turn him into a warrior strong enough to face those monsters head-on. For that plan to succeed, however, he decided to keep the beast head a complete secret for now. Until a proper contract was signed, the young man could not be allowed to know everything. A sly smile crept across the old master's face as he thought through his scheme. Once the agreement bound them together, the rookie would not be able to simply run off whenever he felt like it. Then the old man spoke a few short words in that strange local language. The hero, not fully understanding him, still lowered his head politely and answered with a respectful bow. Watching him carefully, the seasoned warrior noticed one important detail. Even while bowing, the young man had not truly dropped his guard, and his weight remained shifted slightly backward, ready to react. At that moment, the old gentleman made his decision clear. From that day forward, he would pass down everything he knew about hunting to this new apprentice standing before him. The veteran confidently assured him that he would become an outstanding hunter one day. Meanwhile, the protagonist could only stand there, completely lost, trying to figure out what this conversation even meant. The next morning, the big guy stretched his stiff body inside the cabin, feeling as if he had barely shut his eyes before sunlight was already spilling into the house. Outside, the visitor waited patiently in the yard, deciding it was better not to casually step into the home of this newly formed family. The old man had a thoughtful reason for staying outside. He did not want strangers to grow comfortable walking into a home where, sooner or later, the two girls might be left alone without protection. Surprised by such an early visit, the man of the house carefully peeked through the wooden door and spotted the hooded old gentleman standing out in the yard. But the moment their eyes met, the elderly man gave him an incredibly suspicious smile, one that seemed packed with hidden intentions. Seeing that unsettling expression, the young man immediately broke into a cold sweat, as if he had been dragged into a tense meeting with a human resources manager. Without wasting another second, the hunter slung his backpack over his shoulder, turned his head away, and pretended he had not noticed the old man's obvious malice. Just then, his wife called out his name in a nervous voice. Her cheeks flushed red. She carefully tried to prepare a small snack for her husband, her movements gentle, but clearly embarrassed. Watching her fuss over him like that, the big guy felt his own face warm slightly. In his heart, he could not help thinking that his new wife was unbelievably adorable. The young woman looked completely awkward about the whole situation, unsure where to place her hands or her gaze. Beside her, the little girl simply stared in silence, watching everything with innocent curiosity. Then, without warning, the blonde-haired child suddenly dashed across the wooden floor of the cabin in a hurry. She stopped right in front of the hunter, stretched both arms out toward him, and left him staring down in total surprise. With a bright little smile, the girl handed the cute lunchbox up to the young man. Behind her, the mother stood nervously, watching the exchange with a shy and anxious look. After that, the young woman stepped closer and helped her husband adjust his backpack, softly urging him to hurry and make sure he ate properly on the way. The protagonist gave a small smirk, thinking that being cared for by a family like this really was something wonderful. Before he could leave, the little girl spoke a few words in her own language. Although he did not fully understand them, the man guessed she was probably asking him to come back safely. Wanting to learn, the hero pointed toward the young lady and tried to repeat the same phrase himself. His attempt immediately caught his wife off guard, leaving her looking genuinely impressed. The beautiful woman then smiled at him with a soft, gentle expression and gave a small nod. From her reaction, he knew he had managed to pronounce the words correctly. At that moment, the little daughter reached out her tiny arm to get her new father's attention, clearly wanting to join in too. She repeated the same phrase in her sweet little voice, asking him to return safely, and the young man was completely charmed by how cute she was. Filled with warmth and happiness, the hunter raised his hand and waved back at the little girl. With a bright expression, he promised that he would come home soon, safe and sound. The mother and daughter continued waving excitedly from the cabin, sending off the protector of their small family with bright faces and hopeful voices. But the moment he turned and faced the mysterious old man waiting outside, the big guy's expression immediately sank. In his heart, he realized he absolutely did not want to leave home right now. Still, even though every part of him resisted, the hero let out a heavy sigh and accepted his fate. If he wanted this family to survive, he knew he had no choice but to go hunt. And so, the two of them set off into the dense forest, walking for what felt like an endless stretch of time. As the trees crowded around them, the young man began wondering just how long they had already been moving. Before long, the young hunter was completely worn out, his legs heavy from the long hike. He could not help questioning what the old geezer was so determined to show him that they had to walk this far into the woods. Suddenly, the experienced guide came to an abrupt stop in the middle of the path. The rookie behind him paused as well, confused by the sudden silence and unsure why they had stopped there. Then the elderly man lightly tapped his foot against the dirt beneath them. Seeing that gesture, the protagonist wondered if the old man was telling him to look down at the ground. After that brief pause, the mysterious hooded gentleman continued forward through the thick forest. He set the pace without explanation, forcing the young man to follow closely behind. As he walked after the old man, the protagonist began to notice something strange. The more carefully he watched the older man's steps, the more confused he became. The footprints the elderly man left behind in the dirt did not look normal at all. Their shape was oddly distorted, almost bizarre enough to make the young man question what kind of movement had created them. Intrigued by what he was seeing, the young man started wondering if this was some hidden martial arts technique. Maybe the strange footprints were not an accident, but a secret method only hunters knew. With that thought in mind, the hero decided there was only one way to figure it out. If he wanted to learn the trick, he would have to watch the master carefully and imitate every single movement. Right after noticing the strange footprints, the big guy shifted his stance and adjusted his balance. With a serious look on his face, he began copying the old man's movements, trying to reproduce that mysterious walking technique, step by step. The experienced hunter glanced back over his shoulder and saw his new apprentice struggling to imitate him. A faint smirk appeared on the old man's face, as if he was quietly amused but also a little pleased by the young man's effort. Like that, the two of them continued their long journey deeper into the thick woods. Sunlight slipped through the gaps between the branches, scattering bright patches across the forest path as they moved forward. During the trip, the old gentleman paused beside a tree and placed his hand against its trunk. In his own way, he began teaching the young man that every mountain had its own unique species, and each forest carried different signs for a hunter to read. The old man also helped him understand the land beneath their feet more clearly. Instead of simply talking, he made the young man draw the terrain directly into the dirt, using the ground itself like a rough map. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, the hero's wife was in a completely different kind of danger. 3 men from the village surrounded her, their faces twisted with cruel, threatening expressions. Without even giving her a chance to react, a cowardly blond man suddenly swung his hand and struck the young woman across the face. He coldly accused her of stepping out of line, as if violence against her was nothing at all. The blow landed with brutal force, sending her fragile body flying off balance. In the next instant, she crashed hard onto the wooden floor, the sound of impact filling the cabin. Pain shot through her body as she struggled to catch her breath, panting desperately while trying to push herself up from the floor. But when she turned her head, her blood ran cold. Her little daughter was hiding in the dark corner, watching everything. The moment the mother saw the fear frozen on the child's face, her heart seemed to stop. More than her own pain, she was terrified that something even worse might happen to her little girl. Even though her body was trembling from dread, the protagonist's partner forced herself to move. Her first instinct was not to protect herself, but to somehow shield her little daughter from those men. Little Dorothy stood there in shock, her small body stiff and her eyes wide with confusion. She could not understand why these adults were being so cruel to her mother. Tears began pouring down the little girl's face as guilt swallowed her completely. In her innocent mind, she blamed herself, believing that something she had done must have caused all this suffering. The vandals laughed at the fallen woman's misery, mocking her as if her pain was entertainment. They did not seem worried about anyone coming to save her, because in their minds the mountain's protector could not understand their language, and they only needed to keep quiet. But one of them still warned that getting caught would be a serious problem, especially because skilled hunters were rare in that region. Then the blond man grabbed the young woman by the arm and suggested dragging her deep into the dark forest, where no one would hear a thing. With that, the villain barked orders at the others, telling them to take anything valuable from the cabin. While they began looting the home, he dragged the young woman away from the place she had tried so hard to protect. At that moment, he leaned in and threatened her with a cruel warning. If she dared tell her husband anything after he came back from hunting, he would burn the entire house to the ground. The scoundrels celebrated their haul as if they had just won some great prize. Laughing among themselves, they took the woman away and left little Dorothy all alone in the darkness. Still hiding in the corner, the little girl trembled so badly she could barely move. She understood only one thing: her mother had been taken away, and something terrible was about to happen. Unable to hold it in any longer, the little one broke down crying. Through her tears, she wondered if the only person who had ever truly cared for her would ever be able to come back. Far away from the cabin, the big guy sat resting on a massive rock after the long walk. Nearby, the veteran hunter watched him with a calm and composed expression, as if nothing in the world could shake him. Then the old master reached into his leather bag, clearly searching for something important. The young man noticed the movement right away and looked over with curiosity in his eyes. With slow, steady hands, the elderly man pulled out a small wooden object. Seeing it, the hero could not help wondering what the master was planning to do next. At that moment, the old man finally allowed his apprentice to take a proper break. He signaled for the young man to eat the snack he had brought with him in his backpack. A huge smile spread across the young man's face as he opened the package. The moment he saw it, he remembered how much care his little daughter had put into preparing that meal for him. He gazed down at the lunchbox with pure joy. his heart feeling unexpectedly full. In that moment, he truly felt like the luckiest man alive for having such a sweet family waiting for him. Then the scent of the meat and fried egg drifted up from the box, immediately awakening his hunger. The warm smell of home-cooked food made him praise the wonderful aroma with sincere excitement. But unexpectedly, the elderly man reacted at once, giving him a sharp warning sign. For safety, he ordered the young man to close the food box immediately before the smell spread any farther. The hero froze in confusion, completely unable to understand why he was being scolded all of a sudden. He looked at the old man, wondering what mistake he had possibly made. The veteran then explained the reason with a serious expression. The smell of prepared food could attract dangerous beasts, and some of them could sense that scent from a frightening distance away. Hearing that, the protagonist's excitement instantly faded. He looked down at the food with disappointment, realizing this might have been his only chance to enjoy the meal his family had given him. Soon after, they arrived in front of a simple wooden cabin standing quietly in the forest. The master pointed it out and declared that this place would become the young man's new home. The elderly man then picked up a bow with an unusually strange shape. The young man stared at it closely, unable to hide how weird the weapon looked to him. As he examined it, the hero thought back to the hunting weapons he was familiar with. In his mind, bows were supposed to have a much more curved shape than this. Looking at the straight wooden object in front of him, the big guy became even more puzzled. He could not figure out how anyone was supposed to shoot properly with something like that. The mysterious gentleman spoke a few words in his own language, then handed the bow over to his young apprentice. The hero carefully took it, still uncertain about how the weapon was meant to be used. After that, the master turned his back and walked out across the grass, leaving the rookie holding the strange bow. The young man watched him go, silently doubting whether shooting with it was even possible. The veteran then got himself ready, taking position with the calm confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. Watching him, the protagonist realized that pulling this bow must require an enormous amount of strength. Right after that, the old man raised the weapon with firm, steady hands. He drew the string back with the arrow aimed upward, his posture controlled and unshaken. Even while pulling back something that clearly looked incredibly heavy, the experienced hunter did not flinch at all. For a moment, he seemed so still and focused that it felt like time had stopped around him. Without any warning, the arrow shot forward, slicing through the air at terrifying speed. In the blink of an eye, it flew straight toward a large tree trunk. The impact was so powerful that it startled the young man on the spot. The wooden arrow buried itself deep into the bark, sending splinters bursting out in every direction. Amazed by what he had just witnessed, the young man finally began to understand how that exotic weapon was supposed to be used. Filled with determination, the family man copied the master's stance and prepared to fire with everything he had. The little old man stepped closer and began correcting the newcomer's arm, adjusting his posture so the shot would come out properly. But when he saw the hero holding the 10th string without even a single muscle trembling, the master was completely stunned. With an intensely serious expression, the hunter fixed his eyes on the target in front of him. Everything else around him seemed to fade away as he focused only on making the shot. From that point on, he began carefully memorizing every unfamiliar word the master taught him and every movement his body needed to learn. Bit by bit, he was building the foundation to become a real hunter. The protagonist silently promised himself that he would train with everything he had. He wanted enough strength to solve his own problems without always having to depend on someone else. More than anything, his greatest wish now was simple and powerful. He wanted to become a man strong enough to support his wife and little daughter no matter what happened. Far away in the quiet cabin, a cute little voice sang softly about the blue sky and Reggie's beautiful hair. Little Dorothy lay in bed, happily singing about the hero's dark hair and the delicious meat he had given her. Little Dorothy felt so satisfied that she rested there with a blissful look on her face. In her childish imagination, the meat was still growing inside her cute little tummy, keeping her warm and full. Just then, the little blonde girl noticed her mother working quietly in the corner of the humble cabin. But what caught her attention most was the woman's soft, happy laughter, a sound that seemed brighter and warmer than before. As Dorothy watched her, she could not help thinking that her mother had been smiling much more often ever since the great hunter arrived. It had not been long since he entered their lives, yet the whole house already felt less lonely. Every time the little girl heard her protector laugh, a gentle warmth spread through her chest. To her, that sound made the cabin feel safe, almost as if the darkness around them had finally started to fade. But even while enjoying that happiness, the child's thoughts quickly drifted back to food. She was already waiting for the moment her little tummy would shrink again so she could eat more of that delicious feast. Lying there beneath the night sky, Dorothy looked toward the stars and began wondering about the hero who had suddenly become part of their lives. She still did not fully understand who he really was. Dorothy knew one thing very clearly. The man and the beautiful lady were not her real parents by blood. That truth lingered in her small heart and made her grow quiet with thought. Then, without warning, an old fear rose up inside her. She became afraid that one day she might be abandoned again, just like she had been hurt and thrown aside in the past. Her little mind began asking painful questions. What if the big guy only took his wife away with him, leaving behind a useless child who could not help anyone? As that fear grew stronger, tears slowly gathered in her large yellow eyes. Just imagining herself being forgotten by her new family made her chest ache. Suddenly, a strange glow caught the little blonde's attention and pulled her out of those sad thoughts. In an instant, her eyes widened and she became fully alert. Only then did she realize that she was alone in bed. Looking around the dark room, she wondered where her mother could have gone so late at night. At that moment, the cruel voice of her former father echoed in her memory. Once again, she heard him calling her useless, all because she had not been born as a strong boy. He had always complained that she was nothing more than a burden who wasted food. Remembering those hateful words, the little girl trembled with fear, her small body shrinking from the pain of the past. But Dorothy quickly forced herself to move. She ran through the house in a hurry, determined to protect the meat bucket before anyone could come and take the food away. After checking the container, she finally let out a relieved breath when she saw that the food was still safe. Even so, she did not stop there and kept searching for her protector. Suddenly, a commanding shout rang out from outside the cabin. The sound frightened the child so badly that she whipped her head around in panic. The little blonde froze in place, completely paralyzed by shock. A frightened whimper slipped from her mouth as she realized that something was very wrong. Staying hidden, the girl carefully peeked through a crack in the wooden wall. Outside in the yard, she saw 3 men with cruel faces standing there like predators. Dorothy recognized those cowards immediately. They were the same men who used to beat her late father and bring endless suffering into the old house. Hidden behind the rocks, little Dorothy trembled uncontrollably. Her eyes stayed fixed on the woman, terrified that something terrible was about to happen to her. Meanwhile, the 3 debt collectors surrounded the lady outside the cabin. With harsh voices and ugly expressions, they brutally accused her of stealing their meat. The woman cried as she desperately tried to explain that her husband was the one who had hunted the animal. But the large blond man only laughed in her face, mocking every word she said. Soon another man shouted at her, claiming that her husband had already passed away. Then he accused her of being an ungrateful thief, as if her pain meant nothing to them. Even with tears streaming down her face, the young woman kept denying their accusations, but the thugs ignored her completely and decided to barge into the house to search it themselves, without showing even the slightest trace of pity. One of the aggressors shoved the girl violently to the ground. As she fell, he snapped at her to shut up immediately. The moment they stepped into the dark shack, the trio came face to face with the enormous wolf pelt displayed inside the living room. The sight stopped them in their tracks. Completely stunned, they slowly moved closer to it, almost unable to believe what was right in front of them. Their eyes widened as they took in the size and quality of the pelt. The leader's eyes began to shine with greed as he reached out and stroked the fur. In that instant, he realized they had stumbled onto something far more valuable than they expected. Excitement quickly took over the room. The henchmen spread out and began rummaging through every corner of the place, searching greedily for anything else worth taking. But beneath the furniture, the little girl remained hidden, curled up tightly in fear. She could hear the invaders' footsteps passing dangerously close to where she was hiding. At that moment, panic surged through Dorothy's small body. She finally understood what those cruel men really wanted, and the truth made her even more terrified. Desperate to stop them, the mother rushed back inside and threw herself in front of the wolf pelt. With her body blocking the treasure, she refused to let them touch it. Through her tears, she raised her voice and warned them clearly that this valuable item belonged to them. Even frightened, she tried to stand firm and protect what her husband had brought home. But the tension became too much for little Dorothy to endure. Crying desperately in the corner, she finally broke down, then ran out of the house while shouting for Jowan and begging him to come help as fast as he could. Suddenly, a bubble-like spell revealed a horrifying sight. Inside, it appeared the agonizing scene of the henchmen dragging both of them through the woods. While all of this chaos unfolded back near the cabin, the protagonist was still walking calmly through the dark forest. Then the mysterious gentleman beside him raised his finger and pointed backward, trying to draw his attention. But the young man did not understand what was happening. Instead, he simply bowed politely to the old man and thanked him for all the help and guidance he had received that day. Then, all of a sudden, a cry rang out from far away. The protagonist froze in shock the moment he recognized it as the little girl's voice. His face immediately turned toward the direction of the cabin. A terrible feeling rose in his chest as he sensed that something very bad was happening at home. Fear gripped him as he thought about Dorothy's cry. His little girl would never scream like that unless something truly serious had happened. The next instant, the big guy broke into a desperate run through the forest. Branches and shadows rushed past him as he raced back, terrified for the safety of his family. When he finally arrived, the scene in front of him made his blood boil. 3 thugs were holding his wife and stealing everything from their home. At that moment, uncontrollable fury surged through the hunter's entire body. In his heart, he swore that these criminals would pay with their lives. The red-haired invader suddenly turned around, confused by the heavy footsteps pounding toward him from behind. Before he could fully react, danger was already right on top of him. The husband wasted no time at all. With all the strength in his body, he drove a devastating punch straight into the kidnapper's face. The impact was so fierce that the coward was knocked down hard onto the ground. In the same movement, the hero stepped forward and placed himself directly in front of his beloved. Seeing her protector arrive just in time, the young wife finally let out a breath of relief. Tears filled her eyes as the terror in her chest began to loosen. But the big guy did not say a single word. His face dark with anger, he simply walked toward the other 2 village thugs with a fury that made the air feel heavy. The black-haired henchman immediately began sweating cold. The moment he saw the newcomer's terrifying expression, fear spread across his face. Then the protagonist lunged forward with shocking speed. Before the frightened invader could defend himself, the hero drove a brutal knee straight into his stomach. The scammer crumpled to the dirt with a strangled scream, clutching himself as the pain tore through his body. After taking that merciless blow, he could barely draw air into his lungs. Seeing his 2 companions already taken down, the last blonde criminal panicked and threw himself forward. In desperation, he swung a wild punch at our hero, hoping to land even one lucky hit. But the hunter moved as if the attack was nothing. He slipped out of the way with ease, caught the enemy's arm in one firm grip, and prepared to make him regret raising a hand against him. With one quick and powerful motion, he lifted the henchman clean off the ground. Then he slammed him down violently into the hard dirt, making the entire impact look brutally effortless. The brute hit the ground in a twisted, awkward position, his body taking the full crushing force of the throw. Pain shot through his battered limbs as he lay there, unable to recover properly. But the hero did not stop there. He immediately pinned the man down, realizing there was no reason to show mercy to anyone who dared attack his new family. Then he drove his fist into the thug's face, his anger pouring into the blow. In his mind, cruel people like this deserved a punishment harsh enough to make them remember their sins. With his eyes glowing fiercely, the big guy made up his mind to leave a lesson they would never forget. If fear was the only language these thugs understood, then he would make sure they never dared return. In the next moment, he grabbed the blonde invader by the shirt collar and yanked him up with furious strength. Nearby, the young lady could only watch in stunned silence, shaken by the terrifying scene unfolding before her. Desperate to stop things from going too far, his wife shouted her husband's name. The sound made him turn slightly in confusion, even as his clenched fist still radiated a powerful, threatening energy. That split-second distraction gave the coward an opening. From behind, he suddenly lunged in with a sharp tool, trying to stab the hero while his attention was turned away. But the giant warrior sensed the danger in time and caught the criminal's arm without even seeming to struggle. That only made his rage burn hotter, while the henchman began trembling in terror at the monstrous strength holding him in place. The young man's expression darkened as he tightened his grip around the enemy's arm. Without the slightest mercy, he let the thug feel just how frightening his power could be. His wife pleaded for him to stop, her voice filled with fear and urgency. Soon after, the old master also stepped closer, telling his apprentice that the chaos had gone far enough. The hooded elder reached out and firmly caught the big guy by the arm. With a sharp, urgent tone, he tried to pull him back from his rage and make him calm down at once. The master then pointed toward the house, warning the new hunter that all this violence was terrifying the girls. The young lady stood frozen in the yard, her heart pounding wildly after everything that had just happened. At the window, the little daughter was crying helplessly, tears streaming down her face. She was terrified that the bad men might still hurt the new family she had finally come to love. When the hero noticed the child's tears, the terrifying pressure around him disappeared almost instantly. His anger gave way to concern, and his focus shifted completely to the frightened little girl. After that, the scene settled into the quiet image of the humble wooden cabin. Smoke drifting gently from the chimney. The danger had passed, and the heavy tension around the home had finally begun to calm. The girl thought about how sweet and gentle her husband had always been with them, yet after watching him fight, she was shocked to realize that the same man could also become frighteningly lethal when pushed too far. As she remembered how easily the big guy had taken down those cowards, memories of her violent ex-husband rose up in her mind. The sight of overwhelming strength brought back old pain she had tried to bury. For one brief, terrifying second, that intense moment made her wonder if she would end up being beaten the same way. Her body remembered fear before her heart had time to think. But when she looked into the young man's eyes, that ugly fear vanished completely. His gaze was gentle and shaken, and it was clear that he had never wanted to frighten either of them. The partner understood then that his tense expression had not come from cruelty, but from pure desperation to protect them. And now, as the hunter called her name in a pained voice, he seemed to believe his own wife was afraid of him. Riji wondered why her reaction had frightened him so much, especially when she saw herself as nothing more than an ordinary woman with no worth. Trembling slightly, she realized her hesitation had made him think she feared him, even though she no longer had any reason to. In her heart, the wife silently begged him not to make such a wounded, sorrowful face. Seeing him hurt by the misunderstanding made her chest ache even more than the danger itself. She knew it should have been easy to tell him she was not afraid. But the wall between their languages made even simple feelings hard to express. So the young woman gathered every bit of courage she had and shouted the big guy's name with all her strength to make him look at her. The hero froze in surprise and turned toward her, his eyes softening the moment he met her gaze. Riji looked straight back at him, her face filled with determination instead of fear. Then she reached out and held her partner's hands firmly between her own. With warmth and affection in that grip, she tried to let him feel everything she could not properly say. The young woman felt the heat of his large, calloused hands against her skin. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that this warrior was not a threat to her. He was the safest place she had ever found. A relieved smile slowly spread across her face. Standing beside this powerful protector, she believed that no one would ever be able to hurt her beloved family again. With tears of pure happiness in her eyes, the young lady pressed his hands against her face and thanked him from the bottom of her heart for saving her at last. The main character's expression turned serious again, and a trace of worry remained in his gaze. Then his wife gently held his face in both hands, calling out Jo-won's name with tears still shining in her eyes. A moment later, she wrapped her arms around him tightly, thanking him again for saving her from those terrible men. The hunter could not understand why she was thanking him so deeply for something like this. To him, protecting her should have been the most natural thing in the world. He hugged her back and gently covered her eyes, as if trying to shield her from everything painful she had just seen. In his heart, he thought that he was the one who should have been saying thank you. That sweet and careful gesture completely surprised the young lady. For a moment, she stood there in his embrace, stunned by how gently this powerful man treated her. Then the focus shifted to little Dorothy, who was still crying uncontrollably. Fear had not left her small body, and she looked completely shaken by everything that had happened. His wife suddenly shouted Jo-won's name and pointed toward the little girl. Dorothy needed help right away, and the urgency in Riji's voice made that clear. The young man immediately rushed toward the little girl, calling out Dorothy's name in alarm. Her mother ran after him as well, reaching out anxiously and asking her daughter if she was okay. But when the woman saw the state the little one was in, shock and worry spread across her face. Dorothy had been so terrified that she ended up having a small accident from fear. In Dorothy's mind, she remembered crying out for help, but then seeing the hero's enormous fists had frightened her badly. The hurt expressions on both her mother's face and Jo-won's face stayed painfully clear in her memory. Because of that, the little one became afraid that her own face might end up looking the same. She thought she was not allowed to cry, because if she did, she might only be hurt even more. So, in her panic, Dorothy decided that she had to apologize to Riji right away. She was afraid that if she did not, Riji might start ignoring her and leave her behind. The little girl sobbed as she begged for forgiveness, saying she was sorry for hiding. More than anything, she pleaded with them not to abandon her. Through heavy tears, young Dorothy cried that everything was her fault. but her mother immediately pulled her into a warm hug and asked what in the world she was talking about. The woman softly explained that she had only pretended not to know Dorothy because she was scared those men would find her too. It had never been because she wanted to reject her. She gently assured the little girl that none of this was her fault, and Dorothy looked up through her tears, asking if that was really true. The lady then told her everything was all right now because Daddy had arrived, leaving the little one completely confused. Hearing that, Dorothy blinked in surprise and replied that Joe One was only Reggie's husband. To her, that was something she already understood. The mother then explained with a tender voice that because Joe One was her husband, he was now Dorothy's daddy too. And since Reggie was her stepmother, that meant the hero had become her father, leaving the child staring in amazement. At that moment, Dorothy looked toward their protector's broad back, her eyes trembling with wonder. In her small heart, she quietly asked herself if Joe One really was her daddy now. The little girl tilted her head from one side to the other, still trying to understand what her mother meant. Seeing Dorothy's confused face, her mother gently confirmed it for her. The woman reached out and softly rubbed Dorothy's head, her touch warm and reassuring. In a gentle voice, she told her that this new dad was different from the people who had hurt them before, and that he would protect them. Only then did Dorothy slowly realize what had happened. Joe One had fought those terrible men because she had cried out for help, and he had truly come to save her. With that thought in their hearts, the mother and daughter stood together by the cabin window. Side by side, they looked outside and quietly watched the hunter standing there. Then Dorothy pulled in a deep breath, as if gathering every bit of courage in her tiny body. With all her strength, she shouted toward him, calling him Daddy. In her mind, she thought about how huge her new dad was. His body was enormous, his hands were giant, and even his feet looked powerful enough to crush anything that threatened them. The little girl could no longer hold herself back and ran outside with excitement filling her chest. As she dashed forward, she thought about how her new dad was incredibly strong and could keep her safe from anything. She also remembered how kind he had been to her. He had given her a name, treated her like someone important, and even gave her a full plate of food to eat. The more she thought about it, the happier she became. The person who had given her a name, warmth, and food was now her new dad, and that realization made her heart overflow. When the big guy heard that sudden shout, he stopped and turned around right away. His eyes moved toward the sound, trying to understand what was happening. Reflected in his gaze was little Dorothy, running toward him with the brightest smile on her face. Her small body rushed forward with pure joy, as if all her fear had finally been washed away. Seeing her coming, the young man softened immediately and opened his arms wide. Without needing to understand every word, he welcomed the little girl running straight toward him, and just like that, he caught her in his arms and hugged her tightly against his chest. Dorothy burst into happy laughter, completely wrapped in the warmth of her new dad's embrace. The hero thought to himself that he still could not fully understand the words she was saying, but somehow, from her voice and the way she clung to him, he felt like he understood their meaning. The big guy held little Dorothy carefully in his arms, and she looked happier and safer than ever before. Then he noticed a strange, slightly funny smile on her face and wondered what had made her react like that. A moment later, the hunter realized the truth. Because she had been so frightened earlier, the little girl had ended up having another small accident. Even so, her smile was so pure and innocent that he immediately felt guilty for noticing it. She looked too relieved and happy for him to make her feel embarrassed. He quickly decided that he needed to change her clothes right away before she felt uncomfortable. At the same time, his wife came running toward them in a hurry. Soon, the new family gathered together in a warm embrace. After all the fear and chaos, that hug became a happy, touching moment that finally let everyone breathe again. But then Dorothy suddenly remembered something extremely important. Her eyes widened, and she quickly asked where all the meat they had gotten had gone. The couple looked surprised by her sudden question, but Dorothy had already turned and rushed away. She ran off urgently, shouting for the food as if it were the most important treasure in the world. She headed straight toward the bad guys who had been knocked out on the ground. Seeing her run that way, her new dad quickly called out her name in worry. But Dorothy did not even spare the fallen men a glance. She ran right past their unconscious bodies as if they did not matter at all. Her true target was not the thugs lying on the ground. What she cared about was finding the wooden bucket filled with those precious pieces of meat. Once she reached it, the little girl grabbed the heavy wooden bucket with both hands. She tried with all her strength to lift it, her small body straining from the effort. But the bucket was far too heavy for a child her size. As she struggled, the whole thing began tipping dangerously to one side. Dorothy lost her balance and fell to the ground, but even then, she refused to let the food spill. Somehow, she supported the bucket with her head, protecting the meat with everything she had. Her parents panicked the moment they saw her fall. Both of them rushed toward her desperately, calling out her name in fear. The little girl's face tightened with extreme effort as she tried to keep the precious meat from dropping. To her, letting that food fall would have been worse than getting hurt herself. Then somehow, Dorothy actually managed to lift the bucket. Watching that tiny body force the heavy container upward, the hunter could not help being amazed by her surprising strength. He silently thought that her obsession with meat might be a little too intense. Beside him, his wife simply smiled as if she understood Dorothy's feelings perfectly. Seeing how determined the little girl was, the big guy decided to lend a hand in his own way. He gently picked Dorothy up and placed her directly inside the wooden bucket. Then he lifted the bucket with his daughter sitting inside it, raising both her and the food together. Dorothy looked up with a joyful shout, clearly delighted by this new kind of ride. The hero could not help thinking that, for a child, becoming a hero was surprisingly simple. Sometimes all it took was saving a bucket full of meat. Just then, his wife came over and called to him, asking him to bring the food back inside the house. After everything that had happened, she wanted their supplies safely indoors. Then she added that he should bring Dorothy inside too. The yard was still not a safe place for their little girl to be wandering around. Dorothy immediately ran toward the cabin with excitement, still shouting happily about the meat. The big guy followed after her, keeping close as they headed back inside. Once they were inside the house, the hunter finally let out a long breath of relief. After all the danger and panic, he was grateful that everything had somehow turned out okay. But when his eyes shifted back toward the knocked-out men lying on the ground outside, his expression changed completely. The warmth on his face disappeared in an instant. A dark, intense look settled over him, and anger flashed in his eyes again. The sight of those men reminded him that the threat had not truly vanished from his mind. Just then, the old master suddenly appeared beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. The gesture was firm, meant to calm him before his rage could flare out of control again. The elder quietly advised him not to fight people anymore. Hearing that, the young man looked confused, silently questioning why he should hold back against men like them. He thought about how becoming a captive again would only create more trouble for his family. In his mind, he silently cursed those bad men by name, burning their faces into his memory. Then the hunter looked toward his wife and realized something important. He was no longer alone in this world. With a fierce look in his eyes, he promised himself that he would remember those men's faces and settle the score one day. After that, the old man pointed to the gear the thieves had left scattered on the ground. The master suggested that he take the items since things like those were necessary for surviving in the mountains. The young man turned his gaze back toward the cabin and saw his wife and daughter waiting there safely. That simple sight steadied his heart more than anything else could. With a confident smile, he picked up the supply box and the wolf pelt. Carrying them in his arms, he stepped back into the cabin where his family was waiting. Inside the house, the hero knelt down and began organizing the new tools he had acquired. One by one, he checked the items, already thinking about how they might help him protect this home. As he worked, he thought about the family he had already lost once before. That pain had been enough for a lifetime, and he refused to let history repeat itself.
With that thought in his heart, a determined smile appeared on the young man's face. From that moment on, he seemed to have found a new purpose worth fighting for.
He turns his gaze toward his wife and daughter, taking in their faces for a silent moment, and in his heart he makes an unshakable vow. No matter what danger comes next, no matter how cruel the road ahead becomes, he will protect them with everything he has.